Chapter 860. However, just as the stone puppets were wreaking havoc in the group of white armor guards, the Winter Witch's attack arrived. Ice spears and snow arrows hit the stone puppets' earthen-yellow stone bodies, immediately staining their bodies with a layer of crystal-clear frost. As a result, their movements became sluggish and stiff. With the help of the Winter Witch's witchcraft, the white armor guards finally stabilized their footing. While surrounding the stone puppets and provoking them to attack, they sent out strong men to use heavy weapons such as warhammers and flails to smash the stone puppets' two stone legs. Debris flew and rocks collapsed. For a time, the field was filled with dull collisions. Nasi, you and Huaman will hold off the stone puppets first. Ina and I will deal with Sophia and the others first. The leader of the Winter Witches shouted, but before she could finish her words, she suddenly froze. Her eyes widened as she looked at the three Witches of Destiny on the other side of the street. They took out strange metal amulets from their arms, and then shook their hands to release three tall and mighty metal magical machines. Be careful. Quickly cast a shield. Unfortunately, before her words could reach the ears of the other Winter Witches, a storm of metal bullets poured over from the opposite side. Among them, there were some scorching rays mixed in. The white armored guards surrounding the stone golem were immediately struck by the terrifying metal bullets and fell to the ground one after another. Although they were wearing leather armor, as long as they were grazed by the metal bullets, a bloody mist would splatter. If they were hit by a bullet, a huge radial bloody hole was enough to bring down a white armor guard. Under the frenzied shooting of the three magic archers, most of the white armor guards fell instantly, almost all of them with penetrating wounds of broken limbs and broken bodies. After penetrating the battlefield, the metal pellets did not stop. They whistled and flew toward the dumbfounded Winter Witches. Crackling sounds rang out like exploding beans. The ice shields on the surface of the four Winter Witches were shaken, and even the street wall behind them was hit, turning into a sieve with holes everywhere. Damn it, they actually brought metal puppets out. Quick, quick, summon the snow beast. As the austere witch who was the best at fighting, it was impossible for her to be defeated so easily. Once the four Winter Witches resisted the initial attack, they also took out their signature skills. A Winter Witch lagged behind, frantically summoning snow monsters. As she hurriedly chanted an incantation, a large ball of ice and snow quickly formed, and many strange ice and snow monsters pounced out of it while howling. There was an ice beast whose entire body was made of transparent ice crystals, a snowy plains wolf whose entire body was covered in ice shards, a snow giant with 2 heads and 4 arms, and an ice monster that was made of pure ice chi. These monsters roared and pounced out of the ice and snow, valiantly attacking the stone golems in front of them. There were also 2 Winter Witches who joined forces to put up an ice shield to block the dense rain of metal bullets and energy rays for themselves and their companions. The leading witch, who had her hands free, floated into the air with a sinister smile, and began to descend a large area of ice storm on the heads of the Destiny Witches. As for the witch apprentices brought by both sides, they also joined the battlefield. However, with their strength, they were not enough to participate in the battle of official witches. Instead, they used their abilities to protect themselves and barely survived in the corner of the battlefield. However, what was surprising was that the witch apprentices, who were originally not optimistic about the Destiny Witches, also threw out elemental crystal cores and summoned a group of strange-looking elemental puppets. Among them, there were huge rock pythons that were good at attacking, high-fire elementals that could act as firepower turrets, and wind elementals that could fly with amazing speed. These elemental puppets were only at the quasi-wizard level. Originally, they would not have any impact on the battlefield, but there were many of them. The 12 quasi-wizard elemental puppets rushed up and broke the line of defense formed by the snow monsters, allowing 3 advanced grade 1 stone puppets to shake their heavy bodies and come in front of the 4 Winter Witches. The ice barrier held up by the Winter Witches burst under the huge stone fists of the stone puppets. 2 witches who worked together to hold up the barrier fell to the ground with blood and lost their combat power for a while. The witch apprentice who was floating in the air and bombarding the Destiny witches with ice witchcraft was furious. She turned the ice storm and blew it towards the group of witch apprentices. The wind-like freezing air blew through the witch apprentices, and before they could escape, they were instantly frozen into ice sculptures of different shapes. Alicia and the other witches, who were flying in the air and watching the battle, could not help but frown at the same time. They were a little angry at the madness of the leading winter witch. As an official witch, she openly attacked a group of apprentices. No matter how good the reason was, such an act would inevitably arouse the disgust of others. If it were not for the decision of the Witch Council, Alicia and the other witches would have stopped it. However, the madness of the leading winter witch also opened the prelude to their failure. As soon as the ice barrier was broken, they lost the ability to resist the stone puppets and magic archers. The winter witch who was responsible for summoning the snow beasts was also hit by the stone puppet's ice shield and fell to the ground with blood flowing out of her mouth. Only the leading witch was still relying on the swift ice witchcraft to fight. Unfortunately, she soon fell under the berserk witch Sophia's thick wooden stick. Once Sophia turned into a berserk witch, she could ignore the freezing and slowing effects of the opponent's ice witchcraft. So, the stone puppets might not be able to catch up with the opponent, but she could. After defeating the leader of the chilly winter witches, Sophia led the other 2 Destiny witches to quickly rescue the trapped witch apprentices. Fortunately, this group of witch apprentices had not been frozen for long. So, except for 2 of the weaker ones who were frozen to death, the rest were rescued. Seeing that there were casualties among the witch apprentices she brought out, Sophia's single eye with a black eye mask burst out with a fierce light. When she came to the leading witch apprentice who was vomiting blood on the ground, the other party was still staring at her fiercely. "Sophia, you're ruthless this time. You even brought out the puppet amulet and the elemental summoning crystal core. If not for them, you..." Just as the winter witch was still baring her teeth, Sophia raised the thick wooden stick in her hand and smashed it on her fragile head, instantly exploding into a bloody paste all over the ground. The entire street fell silent in an instant. Even the 3 neutral witches floating in the air were stunned and did not know how to react for a moment. "Do you think you can still live after killing our people?" Sophia snorted coldly. She raised the thick wooden stick and shook off the sticky bloody paste that kept dripping from the tip of the stick. She turned to look at the other 3 winter witches. No, don't kill us. We didn't kill your people." The winter witch who was stared at by Sophia instantly turned pale with fear, and her entire body was trembling. "2 of us died, and only 1 of you died. This isn't fair." Sophia grinned fiercely. Everyone was speechless. "You only lost 2 apprentices on your side, but the winter witches lost an advanced Tier 1 witch. How could they be mentioned in the same breath?" But under Sophia's fierce gaze, none of the winter witches dared to argue with her. "Compensate. We are willing to compensate," the 3 winter witches hurriedly explained. You should keep your magic crystals for yourselves. Now that 1 more person has died on my side, it's not fair, so another one must die on your side. Tell me, who do you choose to die?" As soon as Sophia's sinister voice entered their ears, all the winter witches and apprentices could not help but shiver, and their faces turned pale at the same time. They looked at each other, and the 3 witches and 12 apprentices were speechless for a moment. Since you don't want to choose, let me choose for you." Sophia raised the thick wooden stick again without hesitation. I choose her." The one with the highest status among the remaining 3 winter witches saw Sophia staring at her fiercely, and hurriedly pointed out a female apprentice. The chosen female apprentice was instantly horrified, and she jumped up with a scream, intending to escape. Thump, 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 a dense barrage of bullets swept past, and the female acolyte was smashed into pieces. Her broken body and sticky flesh and blood dyed the surrounding acolytes into blood-red people. Many of the witch apprentices screamed in unison, and some even blacked out and fainted on the ground. Capture them all and bring them back to the wizard's pagoda. Kill anyone who resists. Sophia slammed the thick wooden stick heavily, and the Destiny Witch apprentices rushed forward and tied up the members of the other party, including the 3 witches. As for the white armor guards, no matter how they wailed for help, no one dared to reach out to help them. Seeing that the Destiny Witches had taken control of the scene, the 3 high and mighty neutral witches hesitantly flew down. Today's battle had clearly crossed the line. But Arya and the other 2 looked at each other, and none of them dared to step forward to correct Sophia's mistake. Weren't these Destiny Witches usually weak fellows? Why did they become so cruel and ruthless this time? The city guards in the distance were trembling in fear. They might have been used to seeing blood and killing, but when the targets of the killing and bloodshed were a group of witches, they could not help but tremble in fear. What were witches? Witches were a noble race that enjoyed the highest privileges in the northern lands. Since when were they able to hunt them like wild beasts? This was unbelievable. Sophia casually threw a bag of magical crystals to Arya as compensation for breaking the walls and floor, and led her subordinates away with the group of captives. Chapter 861. The battle between the Destiny Witches and the chilly austere witches showed an amazing trend from the beginning. Within a month, in the hundreds of conflicts that broke out in various parts of the north, the Destiny Witches, who had always given the impression of being weak and easy to bully, showed frightening bravery and ferocity. In the witch-level battle, although the Destiny Witches were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, they did not retreat. They seemed to have achieved a magical puppet summoning crystal core and a puppet amulet. Once they started fighting with the chilly austere witches, with the elemental puppet on the left and the metal magical weapon on the right, coupled with the instantaneous magic wands and witchcraft scrolls, the Destiny Witches turned from little sheep to ferocious big bad wolves, swallowing the grade 1 chilly austere witches in one breath. Of course, not many chilly austere witches really died. Most of them were defeated and captured, and imprisoned in the Tower of Destiny in the Dragonbone Wilderness. It seemed that it would be difficult for them to escape until the end of the war. Not only were the chilly austere witches confused by the sudden burst of power of the Destiny Witches, even the witches of other factions who were watching from the sidelines could not understand it. One had to know that the cost of strange things like elemental puppets and metal puppets had always been high. With the financial resources of most of the wizard's pagoda, they could only be used as fixed guards for the wizard's pagoda. Want to bring it out? The market price of a miniature puppet amulet could easily be more than 20,000 magic crystals, and there was no market for it. Without special means, it was difficult to get such a strategic item from the Silver Alliance. If a Grade 1 witch suddenly summoned an elemental puppet and a metal magical weapon of the same level during a battle, it was not too outrageous. Then, when 2 witch apprentices were fighting, if one side suddenly summoned a quasi-wizard level elemental puppet, the impact on the battle would be too great. In the battles that broke out in various parts of the north, most of the parties involved were witch apprentices. The weight of a quasi-wizard level elemental puppet, the witch apprentices of the chilly austere witches could slowly tell you with their own tragic stories. This also led to the Destiny Witches never losing in the apprentice-level battles. The opposing witch apprentices were either defeated and captured, or beaten to a pulp, fleeing with their hands covering their heads. For a long time, as long as the chilly austere witches saw the Destiny Witches, they would turn around and leave, never daring to fight them head-on. It could be said that in the entire battle between the Destiny Witches and the chilly austere witches, the witches were completely defeated and were not far from losing the war. However, the witches' decline was instantly reversed with the appearance of the level of the level of the level. At the end of the day, a Tier 2 witch was still a Tier 2 witch. Those Tier 1 witches could not rely on some elemental puppets and metal puppets to defend themselves. setting everything else aside, just the number of Tier 2 witches they had revealed the Fate faction's lack of strength. The Winter Witches had 11 Tier 2 witches, while the Fate faction only had 1. Moreover, it was the faction leader, Alice, who couldn't easily enter the battlefield. Witches of witches, witches, witches. Of witches of witches, of soul of. When this group of level 2 witches stepped onto the battlefield and began to wipe out the Destiny Witches unscrupulously, the Destiny Witches did not sit still and wait for death. Instead, they sent out a large number of level 2 witches from their subsidiary forces. Level 2 Vampire Wizards, Level 2 Dragonians, Level 2 Magical Machine Warriors, Level 2 Dragon Eater Ollie, Level 2 Plague Spirits. These sinister and ruthless rank 2 members of a different race didn't have the dignity and honor of a magus. They would ambush and ambush at every turn, and they would gang up on their targets. While the chilly austere witches were unaware of their existence, they cooperated with the Witches of Fate to launch many surprise attacks. For a time, 3 of the chilly austere witches were seriously injured, and 2 were captured alive. When such a battle record spread, it immediately caused a sensation in the entire northern land. Morgana, who was in charge of Ice and Snow Valley, could no longer sit still. How did things turn out like this? The strength of the chilly austere witches was almost 10 times that of the newly revived Destiny Witches. This war should have ended with the defeat of the Destiny Witches, and Morgana would have easily taken that wizard under her command. However, reality was far from ideal. Now, it was the Destiny Witches who pressed the face of the chilly austere witches to the ground and rubbed it repeatedly. The psychological impact this brought to Morgana was undoubtedly unprecedented. Forced to do so, Morgana, a level 3 witch, could only walk out of Ice and Snow Valley and personally join the battlefield. The other party seemed to have expected this. As soon as Morgana walked out of Ice and Snow Valley, the Destiny Witches began a comprehensive strategic retreat. They actually gave up all the peripheral territories and resource points, recalled all the witches and apprentices to the Tower of Destiny in the Dragonbone Wilderness, and did not leave. This time, Morgana was completely done for. With her identity and qualifications, she could not go to the Destiny Witches' territory and bully those mortal armies and local nobles, right? But to attack the Tower of Destiny. That was the origin tower of the Destiny Witches. Even level 4 witches did not dare to break into it easily, let alone a level 3 witch like her. But if she were to ignore the Destiny Witches, damn it, at least 30 chilly austere witches and hundreds of apprentices were still imprisoned in the Tower of Destiny. If she were to ignore them, the reputation and glory that the chilly austere witches had built up over the past 500 years would be destroyed. Furthermore, there were still 2 level 2 chilly austere witches imprisoned in the Tower of Destiny. They could not abandon them even if they had to. For a moment, this farcical dispute fell into a situation where it could not be continued. After advancing to level 3, Grimm was surprised to find that the sorcerer world that he was familiar with had suddenly become unfamiliar. It was as if he had inadvertently opened a door, and the world behind the door gave him a completely different feeling. Level 3 could be considered to have crossed the threshold of a high-level sorcerer. That was a completely different world from level 2. While Grimm was sitting alone in a secret room, silently pondering the new wizard spell he had just analyzed, a strange blue light hit the defense system of the wizard's pagoda, startling him. As a small opening appeared in the defense system of the wizard's pagoda, the blue light flew directly to Grimm and turned into a strange invitation letter. The invitation letter was completely made of blue elemental particles. When it floated in front of Grimm, lines of words magically appeared on it. The message was simple. It was an invitation for Grimm to join a wizard organization called Wind of Freedom. The rights and obligations attached to it were extremely simple. It seemed that as long as he left his wizard imprint on the letter, Grimm would be able to easily become a member of the wizard organization. He would be able to enjoy information, resources, and knowledge that could not be obtained from the outside world. The only restriction that the organization imposed on Grimm was that he had to stand up bravely and use his strength to protect the interests of all the sorcerers in the scattered Tower Forest when the three major factions invaded. Through this information, Grimm immediately understood that this should be the wizard organization that the old fellows of the Scattered Tower Forest Association had set up. Their goal was, of course, to unite the sorcerers of the central continent and resist the invasion of the three major sorcerer factions. Previously, Grimm's strength was not enough, so he could not come into contact with this organization. Now that Grimm had reached level 3, he had received an invitation from the organization. From this, it could be seen that the minimum requirement to join the Wind of Freedom Wizard organization was level 3. This also showed the huge difference between this organization and other small wizard organizations. Grimm hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he extended a finger that was burning with a bright yellow flame and pressed it lightly on the invitation letter. In an instant, the bright yellow flame left an imprint of a burning iron fist on the blue invitation letter. With a flick of his finger, the blue elemental particles dispersed into a sky full of fireflies, leaving behind a strange round mirror the size of a palm. Grimm reached out to grab the round mirror, and the AI chip in his brain immediately issued a notification. Beep. Discovered a strange spiritual force interface. Preliminary judgment. Mental network entrance. Data scan result. Safe mental network entrance? Grimm was slightly stunned at first, but then he suddenly understood something. All this time, he had been curious about one thing. It was that the civilization of the sorcerer world was too primitive and low-end. No matter what, the sorcerer world was still a powerful spellcaster faction in the multiverse. His own land of origin should not be so backward. The appearance of this round mirror showed that Grimm had not truly entered the sorcerer civilization. In the past, he was more like a wandering ghost, drifting away from the main sorcerer civilization. Thus, without hesitation, Grimm pierced his spiritual force into the round mirror. With a flick of his finger, it was as if he had plunged into a sea of information. In an instant, Grimm was drowned in a sea of information. If Grimm was alone, he would probably be clutching his head and pleading for his life. Fortunately, with the AI chip, no amount of information could overwhelm Grimm's sea of consciousness. Grimm, who was originally sitting in the secret room, suddenly felt as if he had entered a strange spiritual world, becoming a pure body of consciousness. With a flick of his finger, Grimm adapted to this strange body of consciousness and tried to open his eyes. "Welcome to the Winds of Freedom, sir. How may I be of service to you?" The first person to appear in front of Grimm was a beautiful young girl in an exquisite dress. She was smiling sweetly at Grimm and bowing to him. Grimm looked around suspiciously, then looked at himself. This was a special stone room with an area of only 10 square meters. There were no decorations, doors, windows, or furniture, only him and the girl in front of him. Grimm stretched out his hands in front of him. Chapter 862. What is this place? Grimm could not help but ask. Esteemed sir, this is the entrance to the spiritual illusion of the Magus of Freedom Wind. You can find any resources, information, and knowledge you need here. The beautiful girl smiled as she explained to Grimm. Then tell me about the basic situation of this spiritual illusion. Grimm ordered without holding back. He could see clearly that although the beautiful girl in front of him was very lifelike, she was not a real existence. Instead, she was a projection created by some sort of spell. Grimm didn't know if it was a young girl controlling this body, or an old wizard with wrinkles all over his face who was controlling this body. He did not care about the girl's flattery, and instead quickly shifted his attention to this strange illusion. Sir, don't worry. All of your personal information and actions in the spiritual illusion will be strictly protected. Apart from a few high-ranking members of the organization, no one will be able to spy on you. You are now at the entrance to this spiritual illusion. There are 7 stone doors in front of you, each leading to a different region. Door number 1 leads to the trading hall. There, you can buy and sell all sorts of resources and magic items. The resources inside are not limited to the Magus world. As the girl explained, 3 strange stone doors suddenly appeared on the stone wall. There were Magus symbols on them that represented 1, 2, and 3. Door number 2 leads to the Hall of Knowledge. There, you can find most of the knowledge and subjects of magic spells in the Magus world. Door number 3 leads to the Hall of Missions. There, you can find suitable companions to explore the unknown and mysterious world together. Since this is your first time joining Freedom Wind, you only have the lowest access rights. You can only visit these 3 regions. As for the other regions, you will need to accumulate contribution points before you can enter. With the knowledge from his previous life on Earth, Grimm had no trouble grasping the functions and uses of this spiritual illusion. Under the control of Grimm's consciousness, his own body in the illusion began to change strangely, duplicating his real body and appearance. However, in order to hide his identity, he condensed a flame mask on his face to cover his facial features. Let's go to the first hall to take a look. From the abundance of resources there, I might be able to understand the strength of the Freedom Wind organization from another angle. The body formed by Grimm's consciousness slammed into stone gate number 1 and instantly passed through it. Outside the door was a winding stone corridor. There were countless stone doors along the corridor. From time to time, wizards would come out of the stone doors and walk along the corridor to a certain place. Grimm scanned the surroundings and even reached out to pat the stone wall behind him. It was hard, rough, and cold, giving off the feeling that it was no different from a real stone wall. From this, it could be seen that the Magus who created this spiritual illusion had a terrifying level of attainment in the field of illusions. Chip, can you analyze everything here? The host's command cannot be completed. This place is protected by a complete law system. Any malicious probing will trigger the corresponding law power, the power of the rule. Grimm pondered for a moment and finally gave up on the idea of taking advantage of the situation. He followed the direction of the corridor and walked into the distance. After walking for about half a mile, he arrived at the exit of the corridor. As soon as he stepped out of the corridor, a large underground hall appeared in front of him. Thick stone pillars were erected everywhere, and there were a few magi near each pillar with their hands pressed on it, as if they were discussing something. The entire hall was silent. All the magi were busy with their own matters, and there was no bustling scene like a human market. Grimm hesitated for a moment before strolling to a nearby stone pillar. The moment he placed his hand on it, lines of information were projected in his mind. Buy, Dragon-type healing essence, price negotiable, sell. Eye of the Black Prince, has the ability to absorb spirits, 2,000 magic crystals, sell. Immortal Wisdom Stone Tablet, damaged, 17,000 magic crystals, sell. Azure Magic Thread, superior quality, 9,000 magic crystals, buy. Immortal Souls, rank 3, price negotiable, exchange. 100 grams of dragon scale flowers, 300 kilograms of bloodstones, sell. 50 grams of elemental ore, 1,500,000 magic crystals. Rows and rows of information flashed through Grimm's mind. He had never even heard of most of the names of the items, let alone their effects and value. Compared to the goblin shops that Cabby had opened, the items and resources here were truly suitable for high-ranked magi. Grimm did a simple search and even found the name Flame Essence in the list of items. Buy. 5 flame essences can be exchanged with chaos gems or magic crystals. What were chaos gems? While Grimm was puzzled, the AI chip had already retrieved the information on the chaos gems. Chaos gems were magic gems that could only be found in the void and contained a trace of chaos energy. If used on an item, there was a certain chance of changing the magic properties of the item. Of course, there was a higher chance of the item being destroyed. It was a strange item with a strange use. Grimm did indeed have some flame essences, but there were only 3 left, which was not enough to satisfy the basic requirements of this message. Moreover, these chaos gems had no effect on Grimm. Hence, Grimm gave up on this transaction after a simple scan. Grimm pondered for a moment. In this period of time, the Goblin Plane and Lance Plane had been steadily providing large amounts of resources to the Crimson family, and had already become the stepping stones for the Crimson family's rise. What the Crimson family lacked the most was not magic crystals, but a special alloy called kalos. This metal was called kalos alloy, and it was currently the only alloy suitable for creating spatial furnaces and magic furnaces. Although the other magic alloys had better physical or elemental resistance than kalos alloy, they could not withstand the invasion of the violent void energy. Some time ago, after creating a small-scale magic furnace for the cloned brain Jellu, Grimm's remaining kalos alloy was only enough to create a spatial furnace. That was why Grimm had been urging the Goblin Cabbie to gather information about the kalos alloy in the sorcerer world. Unfortunately, he had gained nothing. In the past, Grimm had blamed Cabbie for not putting enough effort into his work. But now, it seemed that it was not the gnome's fault. Kalos alloy was a high-grade resource, and it was not something someone of Cabbie's level could come into contact with. Grimm took this opportunity to search for information on items related to kalos alloy. As expected, 3 transaction messages appeared in front of him. Buying 1,000 kilograms of kalos alloy, price negotiable exchange. 300 tons of kalos ore for 1 frost substance exchange. 3,000 kilograms of kalos alloy for 1 lich's phylactery. Grimm's facial muscles twitched slightly as he looked at the 3 messages that appeared in front of him. The first message was the same as his own, also asking for kalos alloy. He could ignore it. As for the remaining 2, it was obvious that they had a kalos ore in their hands, but the items they wanted to exchange made Grimm's scalp go numb. Frost substance. Any item that had the word substance attached to it would instantly increase in price by 100-fold. Substance was actually a physical manifestation of the power of laws. In the plane world, laws were undoubtedly the most powerful force. However, this force could not be seen or touched, and there was no way to study it. One could only rely on one's mastery of magic to slowly comprehend it. And in some special circumstances or situations, the power of natural laws could combine with certain substances in the plane of existence, creating precious origin substance items. The frost substance mentioned in the second transaction message was definitely a mysterious substance that appeared after the laws of the plane had condensed and manifested the law of ice. For those magi who were eager to comprehend the law of ice, if they could obtain the frost substance, it would undoubtedly allow them to advance further. However, this frost substance was definitely a genuine rank 4 item. With Grimm's status as a rank 3 magus, it was impossible for him to come into contact with it. As for the lich's phylactery in the third transaction message, it was also a rank 4 item. Possessing a lich's phylactery was equivalent to controlling a rank 4 lich that obeyed orders. From this, one could imagine the price of kalos alloy. Grimm sighed and gave up on the idea of purchasing kalos alloy here. It seemed that if he wanted to obtain a large amount of kalos alloy, he would have to go to other planes to search for the corresponding ore veins. Once he controlled a kalos ore vein, the large amount of metal resources in the Goblin Plane would be able to flourish in an instant. Only by possessing a large amount of kalos alloy and building a large enough number of magic furnace could he turn the Sky Patrol ship, Goblin Puppet Dragon, Space Ripper, Thunder God Titan, and other metal creations on the blueprints into reality. Before that, Grimm could only fantasize about the power of these metal creations in his mind. After understanding the functions of the transaction hall, Grimm patted his body lightly, cutting off the long-distance connection between his consciousness and this body. In the next second, Grimm opened his eyes, his consciousness once again returning to the secret room in the blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda. Grimm closed his eyes and sensed for a moment, but did not find anything amiss. The AI chip's self-examination also confirmed this point. It seemed that the mental illusion was an important place for high-level magi to gather and interact. For the Freedom Wind organization to be able to gather so many high-level magi together, it was evident that they had a powerful background and a deep background. Who knew how many rank 4 monsters were silently standing behind the Freedom Wind organization? Chapter 863. Similar to the Trading Hall, the Hall of Knowledge behind Gate 2 and the Hall of Missions behind Gate 3 were also filled with high-ranked magi from all over the scattered towers. Some of them had concealed their figures and appearances, while others had revealed their true faces. After a quick inspection, Grimm discovered that most of the people in the illusion were rank 2 magi. He could not help but feel puzzled. After asking the female guide, Grimm found out that the minimum requirement to join Freedom Wind was not rank 3, but rank 2. As for why Grimm had only received the invitation after reaching rank 3, it was likely that some people within the organization had tried to stop him. This also meant that someone had used their authority and resources to block Grimm from joining Freedom Wind when he was at rank 2. Only when Grimm reached rank 3 did the other party no longer have the authority to do so, which was why the scene from before had occurred. In truth, before entering Freedom Wind, Grimm had been a little complacent. He had felt that the influence and resources he controlled were not any weaker than those of the same rank. However, this bit of complacency was smashed to smithereens in the Trading Hall and the Hall of Knowledge. It made him realize once again that the resources that the old magi had accumulated for hundreds of years were plentiful and extensive. It was not something a newbie like him could compare to. In the Hall of Knowledge, there were books and books on Magus spells, covering almost every aspect of the Magus world's laws. However, with Grimm's authority as a newbie, he could only access rank 2 Magus spells at most. If he wanted to see rank 3 information, he would have to increase his contribution points first. If Grimm could produce a rank 1 knowledge that was not recorded in the other party's database, he would receive 100 contribution points. If he could contribute rank 2 knowledge, he would receive 1,000 points. If he could contribute rank 3 knowledge, he would receive 10,000 points. However, if he wanted to browse through the relevant knowledge, rank 1 knowledge required 50 points, rank 2 knowledge required 400 points, and rank 3 knowledge required 7,000 points. Moreover, these were only the basic points. For knowledge with special properties or shocking effects, the points would increase accordingly. In the past 8 years, Grimm's Crimson family had annexed 3 or 4 unranked small organizations in the Alobis region. From them, Grimm had obtained some interesting knowledge. The AI chip estimated that if he contributed these things, he would be able to exchange for around 1,400 contribution points. Although this wasn't enough for Grimm to obtain some Tier 3 knowledge, it was enough for him to obtain some basic Tier 2 knowledge. That was more than enough for Grimm. After all, with the AI chip's knowledge of rank 1 and 2, it was not difficult to successfully derive rank 3 knowledge. The only thing that needed to be done was time. Hence, Grimm sold the stolen knowledge to Freedom Wind without hesitation. He then used the 1,370 merit points he obtained to exchange for 3 Tier 2 basic disciplines: Parasitic Spirit Experiment, Edison's Notebook. Scarlet Graveyard among them, the Lee Spirit Parasitic Experiment, was a study on high-level spirits. If he could study it thoroughly, Grimm's defense against spirits would improve a lot. Edison's Notebook was the research content left behind by a mechanical wizard. It mentioned the fusion of human flesh and magic metals, which could be used as a reference for the metal titans that the goblins were currently building. The Scarlet Graveyard was a book that simply introduced the vampire race. It also provided some insights and solutions to the bloodline shackles that existed in the vampire race. Although the content might not be completely correct, it was still useful in solving Mary's bloodline shackles. When Grimm, who had almost exhausted all of his merit points, arrived at the mission hall, he realized that this was the place where he could quickly earn merit point. Here, a large number of high-ranked wizards had issued missions. The contents of the missions included exploring other worlds, searching for ruins, adventuring in the Black Forest, hunting high-ranked magical beasts, and so on. The most basic reward for completing these missions was a large number of merit point. These missions were also divided into Tier 2 and Tier 3 according to the degree of danger. A Tier 2 mission would only require one to come into contact with a Tier 2 creature, while a Tier 3 mission would require the appearance of a Tier 3 creature. However, to Grimm's surprise, he saw a long list of Tier 4 quests in the quest hall. He did not think that those Tier 4 wizards would come here to accept a Tier 4 mission. This meant that all the Tier 4 missions would be completed by a group of Tier 3 wizards. It was easy to imagine how dangerous it was. Nightless City Ruins Exploration Mission, Tier 3, Mission Creator. Wizard of Angmar, Tier 3, Mission Details. Head to the southwest corner of the Nyan region and explore the ruins of the Nightless City Mission Reward. 50,000 magic crystals plus 2,000 merit points. Mission requirements. Recruit 5 Tier 3 wizards. Demon Investigation on the Rough Hill, Tier 3, Mission Creator. Scattered Tower Forest Association Mission Details. 3 years ago, traces of demons were discovered in the villages near the Rough Hill. 7 small villages became blood sacrifices. A Tier 2 wizard of the association, Kurter, went to investigate and discovered traces of a Tier 3 demon. The demon disappeared during the investigation. Mission reward: 70,000 magic crystals plus 3,000 merit point. All rewards will be doubled for the discovery of a demon lair. Mission requirements: a certain number of Tier 2 wizards and above. Among the many quests, Grimm accidentally saw a familiar name. Dragon Hunting Mission, Tier 3, Mission Creator. Wizard Sanazar, Tier 3, Mission Details. Discover a green dragon lair in a secondary plane. 2 adult green dragons, Tier 3, 1 male and 1 female. The female dragon is in labor. Recruit fellow wizards to hunt them down. Mission reward: 20,000 magic crystals plus 800 merit point. The dragon's carcass belongs to the mission creator. Participants will split the dragon's treasure according to their contribution. Mission requirements: 2 Tier 3 wizards. Seeing this mission, Grimm couldn't help but smile. It seemed like his old friend, Lady Sanazar, had not been idle all these years. She had been frantically increasing her strength. Her Venom Wyvern bloodline was similar to Olivia's devouring dragon physique. They both liked to devour dragons of the same rank to improve themselves. However, Olivia did not reject any of them. She could devour any dragon, while Sanazar obviously preferred acid dragons. As for the secondary plane mentioned in Sanazar's mission, Grimm suspected that it was the Plane of Nights that he had helped the Salubo family conquer. According to his understanding, there was a large group of green dragons in that plane. After the Magi occupied the Plane of Nights, the green dragons would most likely be forced to leave the plane. It was very possible that 1 or 2 green dragons were hiding there and giving birth. After all, there was a huge risk for a female green dragon who was in labor to pass through a spatial crack. However, it was hard to understand why Sanazar would abandon her companions in the family and recruit Magi from the outside world. After a brief understanding of the characteristics of this mental illusion, Grimm retreated from it and kept the round mirror properly. The round mirror was the tool he used to connect to the mental illusion plane. The best place to enter the mental illusion plane was his personal wizard's pagoda. Only in his wizard's pagoda could the round mirror receive an endless supply of magical energy, supporting Grimm's consciousness in the mental illusion plane. If Grimm chose to enter the mental illusion plane in the wild, his safety would be a big problem. On the other hand, he would have to expend a lot of element. As for the mental illusion plane in another world, without the support of the information exchange tower, it was impossible to connect to the mental illusion plane. Grimm would not indulge in such a magical tool. At the end of the day, the wind of freedom only used the sharing of knowledge, resources, and information to unite high-level magi. As for how well it could control it would depend on the methods and organization of the level 4 magi behind it. In the sealed room, at a fixed time every day, Grimm would come here to visit an old friend. In the hall of the sealed room, the level 3 vampire Hennisvik was trapped in a giant floating light spell formation. He could not move at all. A silver tube as thick as a finger was pierced into his chest. Drops of sticky, dark purple blood flowed out of the tube. Below the light spell formation, there was a clay pot the size of a human head that contained the blood of the old vampire. It looked like it was about to overflow. Grimm waved his hand and took the clay pot into his hand. He closed the lid and quickly drew a sealing rune on it before carefully putting it into his storage ring. Grimm waved his hand and took the jar into his hand. He closed the lid and quickly drew a sealing rune on it before carefully putting it into his storage ring. Grimm did not leave after doing all this. He took out a blood-red crystal and waved it at the old vampire. After doing all this, Grimm did not leave. Instead, he took out a blood-red crystal and waved it at the old vampire. "Lord Hennis, it's time for you to eat again." Hennis grunted, not even bothering to open his eyes. He did not want to look at the blood crystal. He had been trapped in the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda for more than a decade. This blood crystal was the only reason he was still alive. But how could such a painful life be any better than death? He did not think that the reason why the wizard had not killed him was because of something. It was most likely because of that wretched B***tsh. The only reason he was still alive was because the wizard had left Mary as food. When Mary had accumulated enough blood energy and reached the peak of level 2, that would be the end of his life. That was how Lester had died, and Mary had reached level 2. His death would be even more tragic, and he would become a sacrifice for Mary's advancement to level 3. When he thought of such an ending, Hennis wanted to end his life immediately. Vic couldn't wait to end his own life. He wouldn't give the enemy a chance to use his corpse as a pillow. Unfortunately, his weak body could not resist the powerful sealing power of the Wizard's Pagoda. Chapter 864. As expected, the old vampire's silence was met with Grimm's cruel revenge. Bright yellow flames ignited in Grimm's right hand that held the blood crystal. The crystal formed by the dragon's blood slowly disintegrated into a dark red blood mist. As the bright yellow flames heated up the blood mist, the temperature of the blood mist rose as well. It gathered in front of Grimm and became a boiling ball of blood. When the temperature reached the limit that the dragon's blood could withstand, Grimm smiled and pushed it forward. The ball of blood floated into the light formation and touched the old vampire's body. After more than a month of blood loss, the old vampire's life force was exhausted and he was on the verge of death. However, the moment his body came into contact with the boiling blood, he immediately absorbed it into his body like a whale drinking water. This kind of behavior was not the old vampire's original intention, but an instinct of his body. Dragon's blood was indeed a great supplement for the old vampire, but it was not the case for the dragon's blood that had been heated to a boiling state. As the vampire's body absorbed it, the boiling dragon's blood quickly seeped into Hein's body and gathered at the core of his heart. Ah, a long, mournful hiss. The old vampire, who was already very weak, was now in pain and happiness. The boiling dragon's blood flowed through his dried-up veins, nourishing his almost withered flesh. At the same time that it gave the old vampire strength, it also scalded the flesh and blood around his body, causing him so much pain that he wished he was dead. The old vampire struggled with all his might. The gray bat wings that were curled up on his back suddenly expanded to their limit. He only managed to resist the magic chains that bound him for 3 seconds before he was broken into countless pieces. Red spots began to appear on the old vampire's fair body, which then ignited into countless small flames. Heinz raised his head and opened his mouth, wanting to let out a heart-wrenching scream. Instead, he spat out a dark red magic flame with a pungent smell of meat. After a long time, the old vampire, who had endured the torture of boiling blood, groaned in pain. His body was like a reed in the cold wind, trembling and shrinking. With his previously weak body, anyone else would have died a long time ago after suffering such torture. Even so, the vampires were worthy of being members of the Longevity clan. Although the surging dragon blood brought him extreme pain, it was also rapidly healing up the wounds on his body. It didn't take long for Hein's body to recover to its peak state. However, his spirit had suffered from the torment of the ups and downs, and was already so low that he only had the strength to pant. After doing all this, Grimm carefully inspected the ceiling spell formation. After making sure that there were no flaws, he turned around and left the sealing room. Meanwhile, 2 Tier 2 demonic mechanical warriors stood on either side of the sealed room, guarding the place in a battle formation. Continue to guard this place. Without my order, no one is allowed to enter. After giving some simple instructions, Grimm turned into a ball of flames and disappeared on the spot. When he reappeared, he was already in a secret magical room on the 5th level of the wizard's pagoda. There were no entrances or exits here, and it was impossible to barge in using ordinary methods. Even if Grimm wanted to enter, he would have to use the wizard imprint he had left in advance to do so. Inside was a large biological laboratory. Glassware of various sizes and protective light barriers could be seen everywhere. There were either monster organs, irregular flesh and blood tissues, biological specimens, or some other strange things that could not be explained clearly. Walking through it, it gave people a strange feeling that their hair was standing on end. In a corner of the laboratory, a specially made blood coffin was silently placed there. The blood coffin was carved out of a large piece of blood crystal. The side walls of the coffin were full of intricate patterns, and they lit up as the blood energy within the coffin rippled. Grimm stepped forward and pushed open the lid of the coffin. He immediately frowned at the pungent smell of blood. He held his breath, took out the clay pot, opened the seal, and poured the blood inside into the coffin. The blood in the blood coffin was about to overflow with the addition of the blood this time. Grimm nodded in satisfaction. The blood coffin specially prepared for Mary's advancement was ready, and the ritual for her advancement in the sealed chamber was also ready. Now all he had to do was wait for Mary to raise her strength to the peak of level 2. After pushing the lid of the coffin and sealing the blood energy within, Grimm was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he strolled to another corner of the laboratory. Here, within a large magical barrier, a unicorn with an otherworldly style was lying on the floor, on its last breath, the color of life slowly fading from its eyes. On its bulging abdomen, a fist-sized lump of flesh was moving quickly, finally stopping where its heart was. Following that, Grimm could faintly hear the sounds of chewing and devouring. The wait was long and boring, but Grimm did not show any signs of impatience. 10 hours later, with a dull thud, a palm-sized beast burst out of the unicorn's body and landed on the floor. From its appearance, it looked like a small-sized mastiff. It was hairless, and its body was covered in the viscous blood and torn flesh and organs from the unicorn's body. It only had 2 thick hind limbs and no forelimbs. Half of its head was bare and fleshy, and just its bloody mouth alone took up half of it. After burrowing out of the unicorn's body, the beast crouched on the ground, opened its mouth, and stuck out its half-meter-long flexible tongue to lick the blood and residue on its body. A cluster of milky white flames suddenly ignited on the unicorn's skin, burning the remaining parts of its body and fur into a pile of charcoal, leaving only a sparkling and translucent horn on the ground. The beast suddenly saw Grimm through the barrier of light, and immediately pounced on him. Its thin body crashed into the barrier of light with a clang, and it tumbled to the ground. After struggling to get up, it let out a mournful cry towards Grimm. However, looking at its densely packed white teeth, which were still stained with blood and torn flesh, it would be hard for anyone to associate it with a pet. Come, after eating a unicorn, let me see what kind of abilities you've inherited, Grimm said softly to the beast. This beast was the source siphon bug that Grimm had spent a lot of effort to nurture to its third mature form. However, why would an insect become like a wild beast after maturing? This was not something Grimm could understand or investigate. Grimm placed his right hand on the barrier of light, only half a meter away from the source siphon bug. The source siphon bug, which had been docile and obedient a moment ago, immediately became agitated. Thick saliva flowed out of its mouth through the gaps of its teeth and dripped on the floor, corroding the anti-magic metal floor, leaving tiny holes. The source siphoning bug stared at Grimm's right hand, which was very close to it, with an eager look on its face. Compared to the dead unicorn, Grimm, a Tier 3 magus, was undoubtedly a more delicious prey. A parasitic exotic beast like the source siphon bug had no so-called loyalty or emotions. Any intelligent creature in the world, as long as it could be hunted, would be on its kill list. Be obedient and show some of your abilities. Otherwise, the smile on Grimm's face did not change, but a hint of killing intent slowly surfaced in his black pupils. Meanwhile, the source siphon bug was still drooling over his flesh. Grimm flicked his finger lightly, and a fingernail-sized flame suddenly appeared on the source siphon bug's back. The flames and flesh intersected, emitting a strange sizzling sound. The source siphon bug immediately hissed in pain. However, it was strange. As it hissed, the strange spiral horn that had fallen into the unicorn's ashes suddenly emitted a strong light. When the milky white light landed on the source siphon bug's back, it immediately extinguished the magical flames. The remaining milky white light surged into the source siphon bug's body, almost instantly dispelling the burn marks left behind by the flames. Divine power. Grimm uttered this name in an aria style. Grimm could clearly sense the power just now. It was the unique divine power of the unicorn tribe. This divine power had the special magical effects of purification and dispelling. It was something that other races could not hope to achieve. An exotic beast like the source siphon bug with an innate talent of plundering naturally could not possess such divine power. However, after it had completely devoured the bloodline talent of an adult unicorn, it could actually use the horn to unleash this strange divine power. This meant that the source siphon bug's innate talent had succeeded. Grimm immediately activated a certain spell formation within the light barrier without hesitation. A gray anesthetic gas sprayed out from a corner, quickly filling the entire light barrier. The source siphon bug's body immediately started to sway as it inhaled the gray gas. However, it quickly unleashed a large mass of milky white light to envelop its body, stubbornly resisting the gray gas. Grimm was not interested in waiting for the anesthetic gas to deplete its divine power. He raised his hand lightly, and a few scarlet scorching rays penetrated the light barrier, drilling a few bloody holes on the source siphon bug's body. With such an opening, the gray gas immediately swarmed in, seeping into the source siphon bug's body. The source siphon bug swayed a few times, and finally collapsed to the ground. Although it had stolen the unicorn's powerful innate talent, it was limited by its own biological structure. It still lacked sufficient magical energy to support it, and it did not have the powerful magic-resistant skin of the unicorn. Hence, it could not even withstand a Grade 1 scorching ray, and the source siphon bug fainted. Half an hour later, the source siphon bug was placed on a cold dissection table. Chapter 865. White Tower. Even though it was snowing outside, it was always as warm as spring, and the scenery was pleasant. Little Goblin Loka pushed open the door to the secret chamber and stumbled out. The damned advancement ritual had drained almost 70% of his life force, and he barely managed to advance. His skyrocketing mental energy fluctuated uncontrollably, slowly returning to his consciousness according to the meditation technique he had just established. This oscillation would last for half a year, and it would only stop when little Loka had completely stabilized his mental origin. Behind him, a small, tattered magical machine creaked out and spun around him. Then, with a dazzling sound of distortion, it turned into a small spider puppet beast. There was a suitable seat for little Loka on the oval-shaped metal platform. In the advancement ritual just now, little Loka had chosen to lower his vitality and strength to stimulate the surge in his mental energy. Only then did his mental energy reach the required level. And now, the biggest side effect was that his physique and strength had declined to varying degrees. Especially his vitality, which was so weak that it was even weaker than a normal person. At this point, even a child could kill him with a wooden stick, much less a powerful wizard or magical creature. Now, he could be said to be extremely weak. However, this state was only temporary. Once his skyrocketing mental energy stabilized, as a level 1 magical machinist, he had many ways to replenish his lost vitality. One of the simplest was the earth-fire feast provided by the wizard's pagoda. It was a type of ground fire dragon that came from the depths of the molten fire world. Even though they were called dragons, they were essentially fire element lizards that lived near the lava sea. Even though they looked inconspicuous, they were still a type of pseudo-dragon. Their flesh and blood naturally had indescribable nourishing and strengthening effects. Of course, this was also because little Loka was too poor. If he had enough magical crystals, he could have chosen a higher grade of fire dragon meat. Yes, fire dragon meat, real fire dragon meat, fresh dragon meat taken from the body of a ferocious fire dragon. Little Loka had never heard of such luxurious treatment in other wizards' pagodas. As for the White Tower, as the headquarters of the Crimson family, it was able to supply fire dragon meat without limit. This invisible benefit made many magi envious. Unfortunately, Locke had spent all the magic crystals he had accumulated during his apprenticeship on the advancement ceremony. When he staggered out of the secret chamber, there were only 17 magic crystals left in his waist pouch. With this kind of wealth, it was obvious that he was not qualified to enjoy the fiery dragon feast. Taking a step back, being able to have some earth-fire feast to nourish his weak body was also pretty good. However, just as he pushed open the door to his residence, a huge wave of shouts rushed in from outside, almost flipping him over. Unbeknownst to him, all kinds of people had gathered outside the door. There were human acolytes, goblin acolytes, witch acolytes. Of course, most of them were the antis from the goblin plane. Goblins crowded the corridor in front of the residence. As soon as Locke opened the door, they cheered and swarmed in, lifting him up and throwing him into the sky. This was the highest form of etiquette the goblins used to welcome a hero and a victorious warrior. A large group of goblins gathered around Locke, reaching out to touch his body. They were proud of it, cheering and jumping in joy. As for the acolytes from other races, they stood at the periphery, clapping their hands and smiling at Locke. All right. Hurry up and put Sir Locke down. His body can't handle all of you right now. A goblin leader dressed in exquisite warrior armor shouted loudly, stopping the goblins from carrying Locke out to parade him through the street. Then, he pushed through the crowd and came in front of Locke, bowing and smiling. Sir Locke, congratulations on advancing to become a magus. I represent Sir Cabby to congratulate you sincerely. Also, he waved his hand, and a group of goblins dressed in chef attire ran up from behind him, each holding an exquisite plate in their hands. They opened the silver lids, revealing the fire dragon ribs that had been cooked to perfection. The rich aroma that assailed his nostrils immediately triggered Locke's appetite. His body, which was in desperate need of energy, let out a frenzied voice from his limbs. I want to eat, I want to eat, I want to eat. If not for the last bit of restraint he had as a magus that allowed him to maintain his rationality, Locke would have probably pounced on the ribs and gobbled them up. After becoming a magus, his spiritual dignity was naturally incomparable to when he was an acolyte. Hearing the greetings of Sir Locke, Locke felt for the first time the majesty and honor of a magus status. Under the crowd's cheers and adulation, Locke's mentality quickly matured, and a trace of the restraint and pride that a magus should have appeared on his face. A formless spiritual pressure slowly dispersed, and the goblins around Locke instinctively retracted their smiles, retreating in all directions. Only the goblin warrior remained in place, his expression unchanged. You're here on behalf of Sir Cabby? Locke asked hesitantly. In the hearts of all the goblins, Cabby's name held an important position. He was like a superstar in the goblin plane. Every goblin's idol was either the invincible Sir Tygol or the intelligent Sir Cabby. One of them was a scholar while the other was a warrior, representing the goblin race. In the human-dominated magus world, they fought for a rare opportunity for the goblins to grow and develop. If not for their pioneering development, the goblin race might not have been able to escape the fate of being enslaved and squeezed dry. If not for their bravery, the tens of thousands of goblins wouldn't have been able to step out of the plane and openly walk in the magus world as legitimate merchants and acolytes. Such a great achievement was enough to put Tygol and Cabby's names on par with all the goblin predecessors of the past. In fact, they might even surpass them. Thus, when he suddenly heard this extremely familiar name, Locke felt his heart surge with excitement. "Yes, Sir Locke," the goblin warrior said respectfully. "Sir Cabby heard that the goblin race's first official magus is about to be born, and specially sent me here to congratulate you. These are your congratulatory gifts." Apart from this, what else did Sir Cabby say? Sir Cabby also said that if you are willing to join the Goblin Trade Union, all of your material expenses will be covered by the union. Apart from this, the trade union is willing to sponsor you with 500 magic crystals every month. In addition, you will have priority in purchasing the resources and materials passed through the trade union. The goblin warrior was also very eloquent. He promised countless preferential and convenient conditions in one go, which made Locke's heart palpitate with excitement. However, just as he was about to agree, Locke's gaze swept across the human and witch apprentices at the periphery. Their gazes flickered, filled with eagerness, as if they were eager to talk to him. The explosive increase in his spiritual force gave Locke an even smarter and sharper mind, as well as a more meticulous way of thinking. This made him retract the words at the tip of his tongue, instead replying with a polite smile. He patted his stomach and said softly, "I'm hungry." Sir Locke is about to eat. Unrelated people, leave first. As the goblin warrior shouted, the acolytes and goblins who came to congratulate Locke could only reluctantly leave the residence. As for the number one magician of the goblins, he finally had the chance to sit down and eat to his heart's content under the attentions of his servants. As for Locke's former close teammates, the anatomy refinery acolyte Anchiso and the plant acolyte Eichel could only blend in with the crowd, staring at the noble and arrogant little goblin in the distance, unable to approach him at all. Sir Locke was too busy now, so busy that he did not have the time to meet these two teammates. Moreover, so what if he met them? The gap between the status of a sorcerer and an acolyte between them was not something that could be filled up by the faint familial ties of the past. Sorcerers. This world belonged to sorcerers. White Tower. In a spacious and bright magic room on the 12th floor, Meryl was frowning as she read through the secret magic texts. Most of them were material applications submitted by the family's sorcerers. The more documents she read, the more Meryl's frown deepened. Finally, she put down her magic pen and rubbed her forehead as she began to think silently. The old sly fox Venlier, who had been standing by her side to assist her in her work, raised his head and looked at her in confusion. The requests for ordinary materials have increased by 37% compared to last month. This is a huge expense. Meryl explained simply, her mind in turmoil. Venlier, who was dressed in an elegant noble's attire, shook his head and let out a bitter laugh. He comforted her, Lady Merrill, you don't have to worry anymore. In another 3 months, the resource point in the Alovis region in the center of the continent will be able to operate smoothly. When that time comes, the family will no longer have to purchase ordinary materials from the outside, and we will be able to be self-sufficient. I know what you're saying, but that will still take 3 months. The family's current magical crystal reserves are already less than 1 million. This is something to worry about. Should we get the Lance Dimensions Dragon Hunters to move out again? No, we've just killed 2 level 1 little dragons last month, and the commotion we caused has yet to die down. If we move out now, we'll easily be targeted by the dragons. Let's wait a little longer. Right? Is there any special situation in the Wizard's Pagoda today? There really is, Lady Merrill. Oh, tell me about it. Among the batch of gnome apprentices that the family's leader forcefully migrated here, one of them has successfully advanced. He's currently celebrating in the lower levels. A gnome wizard? Even though it sounds a little awkward, it's still a supplement to the family's strength. Go, tell that gnome to join the White Tower, and all of the family's level 1 knowledge will be open to him. Get those stinky merchants and lousy warriors to step aside. Yes. Venlier smiled when he heard this. Benefits, power, women, magical crystals, and knowledge. If all these things were placed in front of that lucky fellow, which would it choose? Chapter 866. The 5th level of the Blazing Flame Monarch. Within the laboratory, Grimm put down his scalpel regretfully and began to clean up the lab table. The innate talent plunder experiment had been very successful. That beast had perfectly inherited some of the unicorn's innate abilities. However, how to transfer the exotic beast's talent to a third party became a new problem. Things like bloodlines had always been particular about purity. Once a trace of impurities was mixed in, it would affect the probability of advancing in the future. Grimm only had innate elemental abilities, and his bloodline belonged to a pure human. Even after advancing 3 times, he had not given up on his human body. The so-called body of fire and body of the Fire Lord were ultimately just transformations among his innate elemental abilities. If he completely transformed into an elemental body, he would gain a certain amount of fire damage, but the gains would not make up for the losses when advancing in the future. As spellcasters, everyone knew that while elemental lifeforms had extremely long lifespans, the path of advancement was especially long and bumpy. If Grimm had chosen to become a flaming creature when advancing to Grade 2, he would not have reached Grade 3 so quickly. Perhaps this was what it meant to lose something for every gain. In terms of bloodlines, Grimm was like a blank piece of paper, with plenty of room for him to develop as much as he wanted. However, he had to choose carefully so that this bloodline could fuse with his current fire innate ability, and not clash or interfere with each other. But before that, Grimm needed to accumulate some basic experience with bloodline stripping and transplanting. These were the hardest things to deal with. After all, research and secret techniques related to bloodlines were usually the most confidential in any Magus family or organization. Although Grimm had stayed in the Cerubo family for a period of time, with his strength and status back then, he could not have come into contact with secrets of this level. Trying to obtain it from the outside world was just wishful thinking. No family or organization would release the results of their research. As for those bloodline magi families, they would harshly crack down on magi who researched bloodline stripping and transplanting in private. If this secret technique were to spread, it would place all bloodline magi in an extremely dangerous situation. Bloodlines were a mysterious power that could not be seen or touched. They existed in the flesh and soul of living beings, and were extremely powerful yet mysterious. In the past, bloodline research had focused on the blood of the target creature. It was believed that as long as the impurities were removed, the concentration of high-energy substances in the blood could be purified, and the source of the bloodline creature's strength could be found. After a period of analysis and summarization by the AI chip, it had basically agreed with the direction of research. While other magi did not have the AI chip's assistance, their minds were not much weaker than the AI chip. After tens of thousands of years of tireless research, Magi's understanding of bloodlines had reached a whole new level. Even the AI chip could see the problem, so how could they not sense it? How could they not sense anything when even the AI chip could see it? And in this aspect, Grimm had a natural advantage. Grimm successfully extracted all the blood from the exotic beast's body, trying his best to find something different about it. With the help of the magnifying spell formation on the experiment table and the AI chip's scanning ability, Grimm was like a scientist from his previous life on Earth. He began to magnify the blood slices layer by layer. With the help of the magnifying spell formation and the AI chip's meticulous scanning, Grimm was like a scientist from his previous world. He began to magnify the layers of blood. After meticulous dehydration, more than half of the water molecules in the exotic beast's blood had been removed. What was left were tiny protein substances, active molecules, cell residues, bacterial corpses, microscopic parasites. Even though these things were normally invisible and intangible, they made up more than 96% of the blood's total composition, and there were more than 100 of them. In order to remove these substances one by one, a special process was needed to deal with each one. If there was a problem with any of these processes, all the blood purification work would go to waste. Truth be told, the ancient Magi did not have high-powered microscopes, heaters, condensers, evaporators, filters, separators, and other high-tech equipment. Yet, they were still able to rely on the intricate spell formations to complete the research on bloodlines. This made Grimm gasp in admiration. Now, Grimm had no idea how the older generation Magi had done it. Hence, he could only rely on his own knowledge and the AI chip's guidance to forge a new path. High-energy substances? What exactly was this substance that could bring about powerful magic? What did it have to do with the soul? How was it passed down from generation to generation? Grimm could not help but scratch his head. These were all questions that he would have to research one by one and face them one by one. After leaving the biological laboratory, Grimm first took a bath to get rid of the smell of blood on his body. Only then did he leisurely enjoy the most sumptuous meal of the day. With his current strength, he would not starve to death even if he did not eat for half a month. However, eating and meditating were still important ways for him to increase his strength. After gaining control of the dragon plane, the fire dragon's ribs had become an indispensable source of income for Grimm every day. Compared to meditating to increase the upper limit of his spiritual force and gather elemental particles, the fire dragon's ribs were an excellent way to replenish his energy. While absorbing pure fire elemental energy, the high-energy substances in the fire dragon's meat nourished Grimm's body. Powerful sorcery required a strong physique to support it. Why were dragons so large in size? It was to support the requirements of a powerful bloodline. Although that strange beast had stolen the unicorn's bloodline talent with its strange ability, it did not have a strong physique like the unicorn, nor did it have a body that was soaked in holy energy day and night. Therefore, it could not produce a large-scale purification halo like the unicorn. It was like installing a super engine on an old carriage. Not only would it not be able to exert its power, it would also cause the body of the bloodline's owner to collapse and break the sequence of life. Of course, if the strange beast was given a few years or even a few decades to adapt and adjust, it could also evolve into a body similar to the unicorn. After all, only such a body was most suitable for the bloodline talent to unleash its full power. As a human wizard, if Grimm was not willing to change his body shape as he increased in rank, the amount of magic he could soak in with only a 2-meter body was limited. How could he unleash more powerful magic? Therefore, He used the method of nourishing himself to subtly improve his physique and increase the threshold for his body to soak in magic energy. This was actually something that all wizards were secretly doing. Humans were, after all, short-lived creatures. Their bodies were not strong enough, and they did not have outstanding racial talent. The only good thing about them was that their various abilities were mediocre, and they did not have any fatal flaws. Therefore, if one wanted to become strong, they had to adjust and change themselves by hook or by crook. From then on, they would enter a one-way path of no return. This was a difficult problem that all magi had to face. Grimm set a daily limit of 5 kilograms of fire dragon ribs for himself. Of course, this was not a problem of Grimm not being able to afford it. It was a perfect number that the AI chip had calculated meticulously. With his current physique, 10 kilograms of fire dragon ribs would take him a day to digest and absorb. This way, he would not waste any food, nor would he waste any time. After finishing his only meal of the day, Grimm spent the rest of his time in the alchemy laboratory. After conquering the Goblin Plain, Grimm had obtained a large amount of magic machinery technology from the goblins. After the AI chip's analysis, he found that this technology could be combined with the magic machinery that he had mastered. A long time ago, Grimm had envisioned the combination of elemental magic machinery and metal magic machinery. However, in order to turn this idea into reality, there were many problems that needed to be solved. Firstly, high magic and metal. Secondly, energy effects. Thirdly, magic spirit. If he could not solve any of these 3 problems, the combination of elemental magic machinery and metal magic machinery would just be a pipe dream. High magic and metal were the first hurdle that needed to be overcome in creating new elemental magic machinery. Among the 1,000 types of metals that the AI chip had recorded, there were less than 70 that had magic conduction properties, and those that had all magic conduction properties could be counted on one hand. The elemental magic machinery that Grimm had created covered almost 60% of the elemental spectrum. If he did not have a suitable magic metal to conduct magic energy, the elemental magic machinery would not be able to display its power. That was why Grimm had been sifting through suitable magical metals these days, working hard to concoct a high magical metal that could meet his requirements. Grimm's basic requirement for high magic and metal was to have full magic conduction properties and be able to mix them in large quantities. As for physical defense and magic resistance, these things could be solved through other methods. Energy effects were one of the basic requirements for elemental magic machinery to display great power in battle. Magi had their own consciousness, and could memorize and cast spell models. So how would this new elemental magic machinery fight? Could it be used as a cannon like a magic archer, using energy ray guns or magic fire guns? However, doing so would undoubtedly erase the natural strength of the elemental magic machinery. It would be better to just strengthen magic archers. Magic spirits were the only way to solve the problem of the intelligent elemental magic machinery. However, Grimm would have to learn some soul spells. He would have to at least be at the level of a necromancer. Although Grimm wanted to let the AI chip command these elemental magic machinery, with his current attainments in soul studies, he was still far from being able to use the AI chip's clone as the core to create magic spirits. Chapter 867. Dean City. This was a public city directly managed by the Witch Council. It was also an important gateway to the Northern Lands. As the Goblin Business Union that intended to expand their business channels in the Northern Lands, this was undoubtedly one of the places they focused on. Floor returned with a goblin caravan. Although the entire Northern Lands were considered safe, the goblins were under the protection of the Crimson family. No matter what, they were still subordinates of the Destiny Witches. Hence, they would be challenged by the chilly Winter Witches during the war. Hence, it was safer for the goblins to follow the goblin caravans that were equipped with magical weapons. With the magic badge of the Crimson family, Floor successfully entered Dean City. At the corner of the street, Floor waved goodbye to the goblin caravan's father talk. They crossed 3 streets in one go before arriving at the shop opened by the Goblin Business Union. The main businesses of these shops were slave trading, cargo transportation, mining, and logging. They also secretly poached and sold firearms. However, materials such as magical ray guns, magical cannons, and metal magic weapons were forbidden from being sold by the northern witches. Hence, in order to avoid angering the rulers, the goblin merchants could only sell some goblin firearms, alchemy guns, and other ordinary weapons. Currently, the great goblin leader Cabby was in contact with the witches of Dean City in an attempt to obtain the rights to sell extraordinary items. However, the progress was not smooth. It seemed that the witches intended to wait until the outcome of the witch war was out before making a decision. This undoubtedly drove Cabby crazy. However, what made him even crazier was that the envoy he sent, Floor, brought back a piece of bad news. The goblin Loka, who had just advanced to become a magic machinist, had chosen to join the White Tower and become a contracted wizard there. This was undoubtedly a huge blow to Cabby. After hearing Floor's report, Cabby immediately paced around the house in frustration, loudly cursing the insensible goblin traitor. As a goblin, he did not help the goblins expand their business, but instead ran to the wizard pagoda of the humans to eat and wait for death. He was truly the scum of the goblins. However, no matter how much he cursed, he could not change the cruel reality. The current gnome trade union was too little attractive to magi with strength. Up until now, the Goblin Trade Union had already set up contact points in more than 30 cities on the Sorcerer continent. They had set up shops in more than 100 cities, and had 127 goblin caravans of various sizes. Roughly estimating, the armed forces under Cabby already reached over 10,000, and the number of metal magic machines also reached 600. However, the total number of sorcerers and apprentices it had was no more than 30. 90% of them were sorcerers' apprentices, and only 2 were real sorcerers. Moreover, both of them were initial Grade 1 wandering sorcerers. The Goblin Trade Union was a subsidiary of the Crimson family and could request protection from official magi from the Crimson family when they were in danger. However, this power did not belong to them, and distant water could not quench the present thirst. Most of the time, the gnome engineers sent to the depths of the dark forest to investigate the ore veins could only rely on cumbersome magical equipment to protect them. This was undoubtedly a huge loss to the elites of the Gnome Commerce Alliance. However, no matter how cruel and dangerous the situation was, the gnome Cabby did not give up on expanding his influence and his connections. He traveled around the world, making contact with the local authorities, bribing and seducing them to their liking, hoping to obtain the rights to sell certain goods or special goods. What Cabby could bring out were war slaves with the characteristics of other races. Although most of the Fane elves had fallen into the hands of the magi of the family, Cabby still managed to obtain some defective goods through his own channels. Using them as stepping stones, Cabby successfully took down 5 northern witch cities. However, in the most important city of his business, Dean City, Cabby met with a Waterloo. That damned rank 3 Witch of Death, after accepting 3 rank 2 Draconians, 2 male Fane elves, and 100 strong ogre slaves, still did not agree to the gnome's request. Later on, Cabby used other channels to find out that this rank 3 Witch of Death was actually on good terms with the austere witches. It was no wonder that she had been dragging on the trade rights of the Gnome Commerce Alliance. If not for the fact that the Gnome Commerce Alliance still had the golden signboard of the Witches of Destiny, the city lord would have already sent troops to capture them. Now, Cabby was fuming, and Floor brought back another piece of bad news. It was no wonder that Cabby cursed and was unable to restrain his anger. In fact, the current Gnome Commerce Alliance was not a single entity, but an alliance of 4 or 5 gnome organizations. Among them, there was the Blackwater conglomerate that specialized in slave trading, the Venture Capital Corporation that specialized in mining and logging, and the Musin merchant group that liked to trade in firearms. The reason why Cabby was able to win over these large known corporations and merchant groups was because of his good personal relations with the various magi of the Crimson family. However, once he made an obvious mistake in a major business operation, the corporations and merchant group leaders that were eyeing him covetously would all be eager to replace him. This was actually what worried Cabby the most, and what gave him the biggest headache. He was so anxious to personally control a powerful Magus force that he wanted to intimidate these ambitious people who were ready to make trouble. It was a pity that his first step had failed. The Blazing Flame Monarch. Alchemy Laboratory. Amidst a series of sizzling welding arcs, a basic outline of the exoskeleton combat support system made entirely of metal gradually formed. From the outside, it looked like a giant metal armor. Due to the use of magic iron alloy, the armor flickered with a dark blue radiance. There was a long exhaust port at the back of the armor, continuously inhaling and exhaling white steam that could be seen with the naked eye. The joints of the armor were densely covered with large metal gears and turntables that were tightly meshed together. With every step the armor took, these gears and turntables would begin to spin frantically. There were force field generators placed all over the body that could open up an independent force field shield, and could also be integrated together to form a full-scale defensive force field. There were weapons installed on the surface of the armor, such as energy ray guns that could fire extremely quickly, as well as magic cannons that had a large area of effect. Within the hollow walls of the armor was a mysterious three-dimensional spell formation. A sparkling and translucent elemental puppet crystal core was embedded in the spell formation's node. In the past, a magic battery was the only source of power for an all-metal magic machine like this. In the absence of a small-scale magic furnace, this type of magic machine would need to be replaced every half an hour of battle. This might not be a big problem in a low-intensity battle, but in a high-intensity battle, it would become the biggest obstacle to the use of magic machinery. Now, Grimm was trying to combine an elemental magic machine and a metal magic machine. This would allow the elemental magic machine to have a full metal shell to protect its fragile core, and it would also allow the metal magic machine to have an elemental heart that would never stop beating. After a few initial tests, the theoretical idea was completely feasible. However, the high-grade elemental magic machine that Grimm had personally created was made of the best materials and resources, so the cost of a single one was staggering. If he wanted to mass-produce it, he would need to further improve and optimize the high magic alloy, energy effect, and wizard spirit technology. Grimm personally controlled the scorching ray to weld the last core component of the elemental magic machine, and forcefully shut the metal cabin door below its chest. He took a few steps back, and after confirming with the AI chip that there were no issues, he gave the command to activate the elemental magic machine. A beep. Elemental magic machine activation command issued. Checking system. Defensive force field is normal. The elemental furnace has begun operation. Testing is good. Output is normal. Magic energy transmission system is supplying energy to all functional components. Feedback is good. Mobile mech auxiliary system is online. Signal is good. Beginning functional testing. As the complex and meticulous magic system began to operate, the 2-meter-tall elemental magic machine slowly moved its body and stood up from the floor. There seemed to be a huge fireball stuffed under its thick chest, spewing out scarlet flames and scorching heat waves. Extremely pure fire energy flowed out of the magic puppet essence crystal, layer by layer lighting up the entire body of the elemental magic machine. The magic iron alloy that had been glowing with a dark blue light became scalding hot under the powerful fire energy. It looked like a giant flaming man that had been fished out of a sea of lava. Crack, crack. The elemental magic machine advanced with heavy steps under the control of the AI chip. As it advanced, it raised the 2 magic ray guns in its hands and fired rapidly. Streaks of scarlet rays traversed close to 100 meters, hitting the stone walls of the wizard's pagoda with crackling sounds. They left a finger-thick 10-centimeter hole. It had to be known that the walls of the wizard's pagoda were protected by magical energy. Ordinary attacks would not be able to damage the walls unless they penetrated the magical barrier. The magic ray gun of this elemental magic machine could create a 10-centimeter hole in the walls of the alchemy laboratory. In the outside world, it would be enough to penetrate all the armors of a human army. The AI chip calculated that with the magic puppet essence crystal, the power of this high-intensity magic ray gun could reach 260 degrees. In a group of magi, this was equivalent to a powerful attack from a grade 2 magus. After testing the magic ray gun, Grimm instructed the elemental magic machine to test the magic cannon on its back. The elemental magic machine knelt down, and the magic cannon slid onto its shoulder and locked in place. After 3 flicks of its fingers, a dazzling red fireball shot out from inside, and a wall of the laboratory was charred black from the explosion. 420 degrees. Seeing the AI chip's feedback, Grimm finally revealed a smile. Chapter 868. The war between the Witches of Destiny and the Winter Witches was both bizarre and absurd. The difference in strength between the two sides was so great, but their performance on the battlefield showed another extreme. The witches and apprentices of the Destiny line never cared about their territories and resource points being attacked. Once they realized that their strength was not superior, they would immediately retreat. If the other party insisted on pursuing them, they would even leave elemental puppets behind to give themselves a chance to leave the battlefield. However, once the Destiny line gained the upper hand, the witches and apprentices could use the cheap elemental puppets to form a suicide squad and charge into the most dangerous places on the battlefield. As for the witches, they would hide in a safe place in the rear and attack the enemy with instant magic wands or witchcraft scrolls. In this way, the casualties of the Destiny line were the lowest on most of the battlefields. The Winter Witches once made a statistic and found that the ratio of casualties between the Winter line and the Destiny line had reached an astonishing 11:1. It had been less than 2 months since the start of the war between the two witches. Emogunna, who was usually in charge of the Valley of Ice and Snow, finally lost her cool and rushed out of the station with a group of ice and snow guards. Strangely enough, as soon as the Tier 3 witches appeared, the entire battlefield was immediately turned around. All the Destiny witches and apprentices were ordered to retreat to the Tower of Destiny in the Dragonbone Wilderness. Almost all the Crimson family's Tier 2 witches could stay in the periphery to hold back the Winter Witches. The Winter Witches tried all kinds of ways to encircle and suppress these powerful Tier 2 witches, but unfortunately, the results were minimal. Although they injured the Tier 2 Dragonoid and forced back the Goblin Ripper controlled by Tygol, one of their own Tier 2 witches was ambushed and taken away by Mary. All in all, the Winter Witches had lost so badly that they did not even have their underwear left. Seemingly unable to accept such a reality, Emogunna was so angry that she personally went to the battlefield, intending to give the other party a ruthless blow. Unfortunately, Dragonoid Zacha, Tygol, and Mary, who fought together all year round, never met her, a Tier 3 witch. As long as she was on the battlefield, the Crimson Sorcerers would never fight head-on. Instead, they would scatter and hide. However, as soon as they discovered a Tier 2 witch on the Winter Witch's side, Mary would lead a group of Tier 2 vampires and charge at them. The Winter Witch's ice witchcraft was powerful in both offense and defense, but in the face of multiple vampires' attacks, it was difficult for her to resist. Not to mention the fact that Mary, the Blood Queen who was about to reach the peak of Tier 2, was hidden among this group of vampires. Mary's attack power was obviously on the weaker side. Even the Blood Claw with blood energy was only 180 degrees of attack power. However, he was unable to block Mary's lightning-fast attack. Exchanging speed for damage, Mary's 3 Blood Shadow Claw attacks stacked together was also very shocking. Moreover, after fusing with the foreign runes, Mary's normal attacks also had the corrosive properties of blood energy and the defense ignore shadow damage. Although these two magic effects were not fatal, they were extremely difficult to deal with. Even if the winter witches wrapped themselves in a hard ice shell, it was difficult to resist the penetration of the two magic effects. Apart from the Tier 3 witch leader Morgana, the other winter witches would not be able to fight or escape if they encountered Mary. No matter how much they cried, it was difficult for them to escape the vampire's sneak attack. Silent Swamp. In the periphery of the Dragonbone Wilderness, the Silent Swamp could be regarded as a moderately dangerous place with lakes and swamps rarely seen in the vast plains. Shrouded in a thick, damp fog, large and small pools and muddy ponds could be seen everywhere. Many places seemed to be green grass, but if one really stepped on it, one would immediately fall into a swamp composed of silt and stinky water. Many aquatic monsters were also densely distributed throughout the Silent Swamp. Once an outsider broke in, they would quietly lurk in the mud and follow closely. When the other party was trapped in the silt swamp and unable to escape, they would pounce on the enemy like a ferocious beast, using their sharp claws and teeth to tear the warm flesh from the enemy's body, taking the opportunity to feast on it. It was precisely because of the gloominess and danger here that almost no merchants dared to pass through the Silent Swamp. But today, a group of witches descended from the sky and broke the peace here. Morgana jumped down from a snow eagle that was more than 3 meters tall. Her feet stepped on the soft, muddy ground, and she could not help but frown deeply as she inhaled the putrid stench of decay. "Are you sure they're inside?" Morgana asked the deputy leader, Thero, who was next to her. Thero was a Tier 2 witch with a beautiful figure and face, but her expression was so cold that she did not look like a living person. It was as if an ice beauty had come back to life. Hearing this, she first cast a spell to sense for a while, then nodded solemnly and said, "The other party is still in the swamp." When she injured Zevelina, she deliberately hung a layer of winter's chill on her. The other party won't be able to melt away that chill so easily. Morgana also closed her eyes to sense for a while. Sure enough, a familiar chill went straight to the depths of the swamp and was slowly spreading. "Then hurry up and do it. Don't let that bitch Mary escape from our hands again. Thero, bring some people to this end and find her. I'll go to the other end and block her path of retreat. We must capture this damned Blood Queen alive today." After saying this, Morgana took a step forward, and her entire body quickly condensed into a huge ice sculpture. In the next second, the ice sculpture shattered and disintegrated, turning into sparkling ice shards all over the ground. Morgana, who was hiding in the ice sculpture, had disappeared without a trace. "Did you hear the leader's words?" Thero ordered with a cold expression. "The two of you form groups of 2 and spread out. Find that Mary for me. With the leader here this time, I'll see if that group of vampires still dare to show up. Let's go." In this large-scale attack, a total of 8 winter witches were dispatched. Other than Morgana, who was Tier 3, and Thero, who was Tier 2, the other 6 winter witches were also Tier 2. At this moment, hearing the order, the witches bowed and responded. One by one, they used their unique skills and quickly rushed into the Silent Swamp. This was a small isolated island in the depths of the swamp. The surroundings were filled with mud and smelly water that sank with a single step. Only on the isolated island with a radius of 100 meters was there a piece of solid land for one to stand on. At this moment, Mary was on the isolated island. She stood at the edge of the isolated island, straightened her body, and looked in the direction where she came from. The fog here was thick and heavy, and one could not see far at all. Moreover, mud, smelly water, shrubs, thorns, and eerie ghost trees could be seen everywhere. There were simply too many places for one to hide. Moreover, there seemed to be something strange in the Silent Swamp. Even spiritual perception could not penetrate the layer of strange mist that was like a thin veil. Therefore, it was extremely difficult to find a person hiding at a distance of less than 30 meters. "Humph, you can't escape. a tightly bound and blood-stained, which lay at Mary's feet. She gritted her teeth and said, "With the cold of winter on your body, our people can clearly smell it from 10 miles away. Don't even think of escaping back to Dragonbone Waste today." "Escape? Why should I escape?" Mary's expression did not change, and she smiled faintly. "Our leader has already caught up. Do you think you can contend against a grade 3 witch?" You're right. Morgana is already here. However, she has already circled to the back of the Silent Swamp and wants to block my path of retreat. There are no longer any grade 3 witches on the battlefield." "You! What are you trying to do?" Seeing that the other party was being chased, she did not panic at all. Instead, she knew everything that was happening in the periphery of the Silent Swamp like the back of her hand. This made the Winter Witch, Zevelina, feel that something was wrong. Could it be? Unfortunately, she did not have the chance to think too much. Mary raised her foot and kicked her into the quagmire in front of her. "Bastard! You!" Zevelina only had time to curse before she sank into the muddy water with a gurgling sound. Visible to the naked eye, a few clear lines of water in the quagmire quickly rushed towards the place where she had sunk. Even if a rank 2 witch was injured and tied up, it would be impossible for the other party to kill her. However, it was inevitable that he would suffer some hardships. After Mary was done, she leaped up without hesitation. The blood-red bat wings on her back flapped, and she turned into a crimson-red line, pouncing in the direction she had come from. On the right side of her waist, a blue ice sore began to disappear at a speed visible to the naked eye under the impact of the ferocious blood energy. Somewhere in the Silent Swamp, Li'er gently floated 10 meters above the silt swamp. As she flew forward, she constantly scanned her surroundings. The silt swamp was actually not static, but was flowing slowly in a certain direction. However, there was a layer of soft grass floating above the silt, which gave people the false impression that it was motionless. There were obviously many wild monsters within the silt. There were silt monsters, drowned zombies, old hag, no matter which one it was, they could not escape Li'er's mental perception. Mary had always been known for being cunning and cruel. The Winter Witches were almost no match for her in a one-on-one fight. But at this moment, Li'er had her companions half a mile away on both sides, which made her feel a little more at ease. No matter how fierce Mary is, I should be able to hold her off a few times. As long as I can hold her back a few times, the so-called Blood Queen will not be able to escape once the surrounding companions surround her. In this way, I can capture the enemy without alerting the leader, and it can be considered as a great contribution to the family. After returning, the reward will definitely be satisfactory. Therefore, the Winter Witches searched in a loose formation in order to lure that fellow out as soon as possible. Just as Li'er was slowly moving forward, she suddenly sensed the cold aura of winter not far in front of her. The other party was rushing towards her at high speed like an arrow released from the bow. "Damn it, it's that Mary." Chapter 869. The battle began in an instant. The mist 30 meters in front of her split to the left and right, and a blood-red figure rushed to the front of which Lil at lightning speed. The ice shield that was erected in an instant was just in time to block the terrifying bloody hand that was stabbing towards him. Taking advantage of the moment when the opponent's body was suddenly slowed by a layer of frost on the ice shield, Lil waved the magic wand in her hand. A series of ice spears and snow swords mixed with cold wind swept the opponent into the air. Dense wounds immediately appeared on the opponent's slender body, but before the blood could flow out, these wounds were frozen by the rapidly cooling low temperature. Thus, even though she was covered in wounds, there was almost no blood on the scene. No. Mary couldn't be so weak. Lil, who instantly understood, frowned. She immediately focused her mind and planned to pass the news to her companions who had heard the news and rushed over to help. But at this time, the bloody figure forcibly blew away the ice and snow entangling him, and once again rushed towards Lil. "Damn it! This is the enemy's plan. Although she understood, facing an opponent of the same rank who was determined to fight to the death, Lil could not divert her attention to warn her companions. Two beautiful figures, one red and one white, instantly clashed together, stirring up the swamp and turning it upside down. After receiving the warning of her attack, the witch companions scattered around Lil quickly approached her while warning their companions at the same time. Ciro, who was also at the peak of Grade 2, took the lead and rushed to the front. In this way, the two witches who were originally at the edge of the search formation were left behind. Lara was such an unlucky person. She was originally at the rightmost end of the fan-shaped search area. When layers of warning messages were passed to her, the two companions on her left had already rushed to the battlefield. When she received the alarm of being attacked, she stopped and prepared to rush to the rescue, but she had already opened up a distance of nearly 2 miles from her companions. If it was in normal times, this 2 miles of space was nothing at all. If she flew at full speed, she would only need 30 to 40 seconds to meet up with her companions. But in the eyes of those who were observant, this 2 miles was already the distance between life and death. Just as she was about to turn around and rush to the battlefield, 5 blood shadows flew out from the muddy swamp she was in. 2 of them emerged from the stinking sludge, 1 flew up from the withered ghost tree not far away, and the other 2 swooped down from the clouds. Almost in an instant, they surrounded Lara, who was alone. Naturally, the 2 blood knights, Soros and Winsoul, were the ones who weren't obsessed with cleanliness and were willing to hide in the mud. As soon as they appeared, they exploded the mud and smelly water all over their bodies. They waved 2 powerful blood-colored sword energies at the austere witch 30 meters away. The other 3 blood elves let out ghostly cries as they pounced towards Lara's side, blocking off any space for her to escape and dodge. Damn it! Lara did not even have the time to curse the vampires for their treachery. She quickly conjured up an ice shield while waving her frost aura to freeze the blood elves who were pouncing on her in place. These blood elves were of the same rank as her, so their magic resistance was astonishingly high. Lara's ice witchcraft could barely freeze them in place for half a second, and with this half a second, it was enough for her to dodge left and right amidst the many attacks, avoiding the danger of being focused on. But she was facing 5 Grade 2 vampires after all. If they fought one-on-one, perhaps none of them would be a match for her. But the 5 of them swarmed forward, and each of them did not care about their own safety, not caring about the injuries they suffered. This made Lara's situation extremely thrilling in an instant. Damn it, it's been more than 10 seconds. Have my companions become blind and deaf? Can't they hear or see the battle that broke out here? While fighting with all her might, Lara could not help but look in the direction of her companions. Of course, her companions were not stupid. When they were halfway there, the sudden burst of energy behind them made them understand the other party's plan. But when they turned around and wanted to turn back to help, Mary flapped her blood-colored bat wings, turned into a red lightning, and suddenly rushed over, blocking the way of the 2 winter witches with her own strength. Although the 2 winter witches were powerful, it was wishful thinking to think that they could take down the Blood Queen, who was as swift as the wind, in just a minute or 2. The 2 of them fought together for a full 70 seconds. Before the other witches arrived, Mary screamed and rushed out of the battlefield, withstanding the attacks of the 2 witches. She disappeared into the depths of the silt swamp in a flash. The 2 winter witches were stunned at first, and then they realized that the 2 battlefields on the left and right were silent, as if the winner had been decided. Just as they were in a dilemma and did not know which side to go, Deputy Leader Thero flew over with the other 3 witches, carrying a blood-stained and frozen blood elf in her hand. Fortunately, I finally caught one of the other party's captives. Just as this thought emerged in the minds of the 2 witches, they immediately thought of Lara, who was alone at the back, and their faces instantly turned pale again. 1 for 1? Exchanging a blood elf for one of our witches? On the surface, the other party did not seem to be at an advantage, but when it really happened, it still made the many winter witches frown. These blood elves were monsters that were forcibly transformed by the other party using evil witchcraft, and they were not elegant. On the other hand, the winter witches on the other side were nurtured bit by bit at a huge cost. Seriously speaking, the two sides were not on the same level at all, and there was no comparison. If it was such a one-for-one exchange, the winter witches would definitely suffer. Kill her. A witch with a cold expression said sternly. Deputy Leader Thero shook her head silently. We can't kill her. A witch next to her explained gloomily. If we kill her, we will give them an excuse to kill our sisters. Don't forget that 2 of our companions have fallen into their hands. Deputy Leader Thero narrowed her eyes, scanned the evil and strange area, and said coldly, I've been to this silent swamp before, and there was no such strange fog. It seems that this is a battlefield that they set up in advance. We can only blame ourselves for being too careless and stepping into their home ground too easily. Then, should we continue to search next? Search. Deputy Leader Thero said coldly, I've informed the leader. She is moving towards us from the other side. If those vampires still want to play a second game, I'll make them all stay. After saying that, the winter witches nodded in unison, dispersed again, and continued to search slowly forward. But this time, the distance between them had been shortened to 200 meters. However, these winter witches did not know that at this moment, above the thick fog of the silent swamp, there were 10 eyeball fighters slowly gliding in the sky. An interference spell formation had been set up in advance in the depths of the swamp fog, which caused most people's mental perception to have a huge deviation. However, the Crimson Sorcerers, who were prepared in advance, had buried special monitoring crystals everywhere in the swamp, and then transmitted the detected information to the eyeball fighters high above the swamp in a point-to-point manner. The eyeball fighters then transmitted the real-time dynamic picture of the swamp to the vampires in charge of fighting. Using this method, a blood elf was used as bait to lure the witches into disarray. Then, Mary personally intercepted the witches and cut off the possible reinforcements that the lone witches might get. That was how they managed to capture a chilly winter witch in exchange for one. In this way, the captive in Mary's hands increased from 1 to 2. However, just as Mary and a few vampire subordinates gathered together to plan a new attack, the eyeball fighters sent back a piece of news that made them feel uneasy. Behind the silent swamp, a huge snowstorm was approaching quickly. Everywhere it passed, everything within a few miles was frozen, and even the spies that Mary and the others had planted in advance were cut off one by one. Needless to say, Morgana had lost her patience and began to enter the battlefield forcefully. You guys take the captives back first. I want to meet that Morgana. Facing a rank 3 witch who was close to going berserk, Mary was not willing to risk her life and lose all the things that she had won in the past. Therefore, under her command, the numerous vampires fished out the bruised Zevelina from the quagmire and wrapped up the bloodied and dispirited Lara. One by one, they turned into a huge blood-red bat, bypassing the destructive snowstorm, and sneaked back to the Dragonbone Waste. Entering the Dragonbone Waste was equivalent to entering the territory of the Witches of Destiny. Almost all the various monsters entrenched there were controlled and driven by the Tower of Destiny. If the Winter Witches dared to invade, the road from here to the Tower of Destiny would not be peaceful. However, Mary herself did not leave. Instead, she carefully and slowly sorted out the items and equipment on her body, using these actions to relax her body and mind bit by bit. There was no excitement about the upcoming battle with a rank 3 witch, nor was there any anxiety. Mary's heart was cold and calm, just like the unmoving core of a vampire. Vampires did not have a heartbeat. It was precisely because they had lost their ability to produce blood that the vampire race was forced to drink the blood of others to make up for the loss of their own blood. Although the heart no longer beat and had lost its original function, it was still one of the most important organs of a vampire's body. This was because most of their spiritual consciousness was stored in the core, which was the true carrier of their soul. If Grim could fight a rank 3 witch with his rank 2 body, why couldn't she? Chapter 870. Mary dashed across the swamp at a speed she had never seen before. Countless swamps and dead trees appeared in her field of vision before quickly disappearing behind her. The surrounding scenery became more and more blurry. All objects and colors became mottled and mixed together, becoming more and more difficult to distinguish. Even without the help of the bat wings on her back, Mary could still fly in the air. Mary dragged a long trail of bloody afterimages behind her. The tips of her feet lightly tapped on the soft and empty meadow, and with a little bit of buoyancy, she was able to pass through the swamp without any hindrance. At the end of her line of sight, a whirling snowstorm was wreaking havoc in the silent swamp. Everywhere it passed, the mud swamp was frozen, the shrubs and thorns were frozen, and even the ferocious monsters hiding in the mud dozens of meters below were frozen into ice sculptures by the extreme cold power. Soon, they lost their last trace of life. The snowstorm was also advancing at an extremely high speed. At the edge of the snowstorm where the cold wind wreaked havoc, one could vaguely see the slender and tall figure of a woman floating forward. And this terrible snowstorm was like a beautiful palace gauze draped over her vigorous figure. As she moved forward, white ice and blue frost covered every corner of the place. When they were still 200 meters apart, Mary felt that her body had become a little weak, as if she was about to be swept away by the snowstorm and lose control. In the distance, the destructive snowstorm was also sweeping towards her. Good, very good. I'll remember your name. Mary, I hope you won't regret your actions later. Go to hell. Morgana's cold voice filled with hatred could be heard from within the snowstorm. Immediately after, dozens of milky white frost balls shot out from the snowstorm. As they spun forward rapidly, they shot frost arrows in all directions. Mary's flying figure was immediately wrapped up by the frost arrows that were as dense as raindrops. Mary's mental strength was instantly raised to the extreme. The world in front of her was rapidly enlarging and slowing down. Crystalline frost arrows seemed to cover every corner of his field of vision. Some flew straight, some circled, some spun, some rolled. They collided with each other and pressed against each other, making the originally irregular rain of arrows even more unpredictable. In the face of such a rain of arrows, ordinary wizards could only raise their shields to resist. Mary, who was completely immersed in the battle, had long since forgotten fear and death. Her figure turned into a blood-red lightning, leisurely walking in the dense rain of arrows. Yes, when her spirit was raised to the extreme, when she unleashed her speed to the extreme, the combination of the two formed a strange scene that was almost slow motion. In Mary's eyes, the rolling snowstorm in the distance, the rapidly freezing swamp creatures, and the crazy rain of arrows that filled her field of vision were like images flipping frame by frame, allowing her to clearly see every detail and process power. What was power? The Tier 3 witch Morgana's torrential storm could already be considered a type of ultimate power of ice. However, in the eyes of a true powerhouse, their power was severely dispersed, and they could not condense the power of ice and snow into a single point to deal the greatest damage to the enemy. Even if it was a Tier 3 witch's icebound ball, Mary was still confident that she would be able to break through it without dying. This was probably a huge flaw that elemental witches could not avoid. Mary was like a powerful queen strolling in a still world, leisurely moving forward in the dense rain of frost arrows. For those places that were too dense for her to pass through, she stretched out a tender, white finger with a trace of light red energy wrapped around it. With a light flick, the cold and hard ice arrows slightly adjusted the angle of their sharp edges, avoiding her body. In Mary's eyes, this was simply a frame by frame, but in the eyes of Morgana, who was not far away, there was a trace of a mysterious and strange feeling. Countless frost arrows filled the entire space, so densely packed that there was almost no gap between them. However, that damned Mary was like an elegant lady strolling in her garden, elegant and calm without a trace of fear or panic. What was even worse was that she seemed to be possessed by the heavens, leisurely strolling in the rain of arrows without a single injury. Speaking of which, when the dense rain of arrows arrived in front of Mary, it was like a subject seeing a king, actually moving to the side on its own accord. Thus, the sky full of frost arrows could be seen, but all of them were close to Mary's body, temples, ears, neck, armpits, just right to miss her. After a round of dense icebound balls, Mary was actually unharmed. Other than a slightly flushed face, there were almost no other changes. Morgana was shocked. Mary was panting a little violently. That wonderful state just now only lasted for less than 5 fingers, and it allowed her to perfectly avoid a terrifying and destructive Tier 3 spell. If she could maintain that wonderful state for a long time, wouldn't she be able to easily defeat all her opponents? However, although the 5 fingers just now were short, it quickly exhausted all of her spiritual force. If not for the strong physique of a Tier 2 vampire supporting her, she was afraid that she would have collapsed to the ground with her brows tightly knitted. Damn it, that instantaneous burst of strength actually consumed so much spiritual force, Mary cursed as she quickly retreated. As she escaped from the Tier 3 witch's side, she also took out a blood crystal and threw it into her mouth. The blood crystal formed from the Tier 2 giant dragon's blood was quickly converted into a copious amount of blood energy in her body, and it also allowed her spiritual sea to slowly recover and rise. Not far away, Morgana, who was stunned by Mary's shocking performance, finally noticed her abnormality. She instantly understood that Mary must have used some kind of secret technique that stimulated her potential, which allowed her to avoid her witchcraft without suffering any accidental injuries. However, this secret technique seemed to have a shocking side effect, and with just a few fingers, it had drained her spiritual force. From this, it seemed that Mary was nothing to worry about. After thinking this through, Morgana was no longer surprised by Mary's performance. She waved her hands continuously, and a large cloud of cold air enveloped Mary like a cloud. With Morgana's attainments in ice witchcraft, as long as Mary was enveloped by the cold air, she would instantly be frozen into a human-shaped ice sculpture. When that time came, it would be up to the Tier 3 witch to decide whether to kill or dismember her. Mary quickly retreated, and the cloud of cold air chased closely behind her. The front of the cold wave was only half a meter away from the tip of Mary's bat wings. Left without a choice, Mary could only raise her head and let out an ear-piercing scream, and the violent blood energy instantly spread around her body. With the support of this blood energy, Mary's flying speed instantly increased by nearly half, and she gradually increased the distance between her and the cold wave behind her. Although Morgana was proficient in ice witchcraft, she did not have any expertise in flying. Mary's full burst of strength instantly increased the distance between the two of them. Then, like a sharp arrow released from a bow, she pierced into the depths of the fog, and disappeared without a trace. Morgana chased after her for another 2 kilometers before she unwillingly stopped. An ice storm surged and roared beside her, and the surroundings quickly turned into a world of ice and snow. Unfortunately, no matter how furious she could not change the fact that her opponent had already escaped. That damned Tier 2 vampire, although his battle power was not comparable to hers, with his terrifying speed, Morgana would not be able to do anything to him. So what if his witchcraft was strong? If she could not catch up to him, everything was just a bubble. For the first time, Morgana felt a little regret. Perhaps she should have put more effort into speed in the past. Almost no one knew about this short encounter that happened in the depths of the silent swamp. Although Mary had exhausted her spiritual force, and her body was slightly damaged due to the full burst of blood energy, her heart was surging, and she was so excited that she could not control herself. Because just now, at the most intense moment of the battle, she suddenly saw clearly the path of her future development. This fighting style was the most suitable for her, and it was also incomparably powerful. Therefore, Mary did not stop, and her whole body turned into a line of blood, traversing hundreds of kilometers in a straight line, directly returning to the Tower of Fate. At this moment, Mary was suddenly filled with incomparable confidence in advancing to Tier 3. The Tower of Fate. Alice stood alone on the astrological platform at the top, silently gazing into the distance. From her position, it was naturally impossible for her to see everything that happened in the silent swamp 100 kilometers away. However, in front of her, a huge water mirror wall displayed the scene in the distance. The vast and resplendent power of the starlight was slowly dissipating, and Alice's lonely figure seemed faintly weak and swaying. The little elemental fairy, Helen, was angrily coiled around her, and could not help but angrily ask her questions. Why did you help her? Why did you help her? That fellow is your competitor. Why did you exhaust your own strength to help her? If it was me, I would curse her to lose control of her strength, and it would be best if she died in the hands of that Tier 3 witch. Seeing Helen's indignant expression, Alice, who had just passed the period of weakness, revealed a pale smile. Where did you learn all this from, little fellow? You're still young. You don't understand the meaning of companions. Once they started scheming against each other and deceiving each other, it was inevitable that this newly formed force would fall apart. Isn't it good to let the strength of companions become stronger, and be able to protect us better? Humph, I can't win against you in an argument, but I still feel that I shouldn't help that Mary. She keeps pestering that fellow. Helen's voice became softer and softer. That's my problem, isn't it? Alice smiled weakly. All right, stop fooling around, quickly bring me to rest. Chapter 871. What was the difference between a level 3 and a level 2? If one were to analyze it in a simple manner, it would mean stronger strength, higher physique, faster speed, and even more terrifying mental strength. However, no sorcerer could improve their physical fitness in such a comprehensive way. They had to focus on something and give up something. Therefore, elemental sorcerers focused on mental strength, taking into account physique, and completely abandoning strength and agility. There were 3 types of anatomy refinery sorcerers. Some focused on strength, some focused on physique, and of course there were those like Mary who focused on agility. As for bloodline sorcerers, it depended on what bloodline they inherited. If they inherited the berserk ape, their physique and strength would be greatly enhanced, and their agility would not be too bad. Only their mental strength was a little low. If they inherited the fire dragon bloodline, their overall physical fitness would be greatly enhanced. In particular, fire sorcery would be the best. However, this analysis was only the basic physical data of both sides, and it was not comprehensive enough. Don't forget, as a level 3 sorcerer, they could easily live for hundreds of years longer than a level 2 sorcerer. During these hundreds of years, they could use all effective methods and means to improve their basic strength and dig deeper into their potential to go further on the path of witchcraft. Therefore, as a level 3 winter witch, Gunna's physical fitness was not necessarily weak in addition to her high mental strength. Gunna, level 3 advanced. Profession identity. Elemental sorcerer, ice specialization. Basic physical data. Strength greater than 24, constitution greater than 21, agility greater than 16, spirit greater than 37. Profession skill. Icy bloodline. Just from her basic physical fitness, it could be seen that she was a level 3 elemental witch with a weak body, but her constitution and strength both exceeded 20 points. This also meant that she had a strong physique that was not inferior to a level 2 anatomy refinery sorcerer. In this way, whether it was in terms of resistance or recovery after physical injury, she could be comparable to a level 2 anatomy refinery sorcerer. Perhaps the only difference between her and a level 2 anatomy refinery sorcerer was that she did not have the physical instincts and melee combat methods that had been tempered. She might not be able to win against a rank 2 anatomy refinery sorcerer in close combat if she abandoned her sorcery, but her high physical and elemental resistance was already on par with her opponent. With the addition of the rank 3 spells, Morgana could easily fight a rank 2 anatomy refinery sorcerer for 100 rounds without being at a disadvantage if she swung the big wooden mallet. 16 points of agility meant that Morgana's running or movement speed was almost the same as Mary's at Tier 1. This speed might be a little slow for Mary, who now had 29 points of agility, but it was more than enough for most wizard battles. To be honest, if it wasn't for the fact that Morgana coveted 15 points of agility, which increased the speed of her spellcasting, she wouldn't have been willing to invest her time and resources into this branch that had the least impact on her combat ability. As for spiritual force, it was closely related to the strength of the spell, the duration of the spell's effects, the probability of triggering the spell's effects, and so on. With Morgana's 37 points of spiritual power, even after deducting the bonuses from all the equipment and tools, a frost arrow could reach 370 degrees of witchcraft power. As for a rank 2 elemental sorcerer, a rank 2 ice shield would only have a defense of 350 degrees. This also meant that any rank 2 sorcerer, even if they had all their defenses, would be as fragile as a piece of paper in front of Morgana. With just a few simple instant cast rank 3 spells, Morgana could easily pierce the eggshell outside the opponent's body and turn them into an ice sculpture. As for Morgana, with the physical and magical resistance of a rank 3 witch, in addition to the support of rank 3 spells, her basic defense could reach 600 to 700 degrees. This also meant that when fighting against a rank 2 elemental sorcerer, even if Morgana did not fight back and just poured her wizard power into the ice shield, she could still render the opponent helpless and immovable. However, all of this did not take into account Morgana's sorcery ability. One had to know that Morgana was the leader of the Winter Witches with the icy bloodline. The ice sorcery that she mastered, whether it was the strength of the spell, the range of the spell, or the effect of the spell, was far above that of ordinary Winter Witches. Once the icy bloodline was activated, all of Morgana's ice sorcery would lose its cooldown time. At that time, she would probably be able to turn the area within a radius of 5 kilometers into a world of ice within half a minute, with no signs of life remaining. The power of the chilly austere witches was famous even in ancient times. As for Morgana's counterpart, Mary, she was a vampire sorcerer who was close to the peak of rank 2. She walked the bloodline route. Mary, peak of rank 2. Profession identity: bloodline sorcerer, vampire. Basic stats: strength 15, constitution 17, agility 29, spirit 18. Profession skill: embrace. From the basic combat power, it could be seen that the gap between the rank 2 Mary and the rank 3 Morgana was simply too big. The two were not on the same level at all. Of course, part of the reason was the characteristics of Mary's own profession ability. As a vampire sorcerer, a large part of Mary's profession ability was reflected in the embrace. Unlike other sorcerers, Mary had the ability to quickly create secondary blood descendants. Therefore, in order to calculate her true combat power, the various forms of vampire descendants must also be taken into account. Now, Mary had 2 Blood Knights, advanced rank 2, 3 Blood Elves, beginner rank 2, and a recovering Blood Dragon, intermediate rank 2. In addition, there were 13 rank 1 Blood Elves and nearly 100 ordinary vampires. If all of these subordinates were brought out, Mary could not look down on all the other rank 2 sorcerers, but she could at least occupy a relatively high position in the group of rank 2 sorcerers. However, even with Mary's impressive strength, in front of the rank 3 Winter Witch leader, Morgana, she was still a small fry that could be destroyed with a flick of her finger. However, with Mary's extraordinary agility, it would be difficult for Morgana to catch her without the help of the terrain or external objects. After all, Mary's 29 points of agility gave her extraordinary movement and reaction speed. When she exerted her speed to the extreme, most of the creatures in the world were still in her eyes. However, with Mary's 18 points of spirit, it was difficult for her to maintain that overclocking state for a long time. From the brief contact with Emogana, it could be seen that Mary could only maintain this state for 5 seconds at most. After 5 seconds, she would be forcibly kicked out of this strange overclocking state due to the exhaustion of her spirit. Otherwise, in a completely still world, no matter how powerful a witch was, it would be difficult to escape her slaughter. However, the brief contact with the rank 3 witch had also benefited Mary a lot. At least from her point of view, she had found a very suitable direction for her development. If she could improve on this overclocking state, Mary's combat ability would definitely increase explosively. Therefore, as soon as she escaped back to the Tower of Destiny, Mary hid in a secret room and never showed her face again. From the looks of it, she would not rest until she had thoroughly studied this overclocking state. Silent Swamp. The once cold and terrifying magic swamp had now completely changed. A large area of snowstorm raged inside the swamp. Wherever it went, white snow piled up, and all things were desolate. Everything between heaven and earth was frozen in thick and dense ice crystals. The ferocious magical beasts that had gathered in the silent swamp were like cowering little sheep in front of a berserk rank 3 witch. They did not even have the chance to resist before they were turned into ice sculptures one after another, their lives extinguished. The silent swamp was now truly worthy of its name. It had become a silent place where all life was forbidden. Emoguna's body was surrounded by a destructive snowstorm. She stood alone at the entrance of the Dragonbone Waste, looking at the faintly discernible mysterious tower at the end of the horizon. The rage and wildness in her heart could not be concealed. A bunch of little fellows that were like underground rats in her eyes actually dared to play tricks in front of her, creating a show. The stimulation and humiliation this brought to Emoguna was simply incomparable. Thinking back to how she had humiliated Alice in every possible way at the Witch Council 2 months ago, the defeats in the past month were like slaps to her face. In fact, Morgana could even imagine the cold and disdainful gazes of the various leaders of the witches at the next Witch Council meeting. The dignity of a rank 3 which was not to be despised. Emoguna roared in her heart. Her eyes that were originally flashing with lightning and rumbling with thunder had strangely turned milky white, just like the snowstorm that filled the sky. "Chief, you can't go." Thero hurried to Emoguna with the other witches. For the first time, a worried look appeared on her cold and ruthless face. However, when she saw Emoguna's horrifying pupils that had almost turned pure white when she fully activated her wizard power, Thero also knew that she was powerless to stop her. Because at this moment, Emoguna had clearly activated her ice-cold bloodline. If she did not let the evil fire in her heart vent out, it would probably harm her body. The winter witches looked at each other and could only helplessly disperse to the sides. They watched helplessly as Emoguna turned into a huge snowstorm and walked step by step into the Dragonbone Waste. "Molly, go to Emma City and transfer the 3rd Snow Guard here. Shinaz, go back to the family's encampment and drive all the snow beasts into the Dragonbone Waste. Cielsa, take the others to protect the chief. Also, pay attention to your own safety." Under Deputy Chief Thero's crisp and concise instructions, the remaining witches immediately took action, riding on their flying broomsticks and rushing to different areas. As rank 2 witches, although they had the ability to temporarily float and fly, when it came to long-distance flight, it was still more convenient, faster, and more mental strength to use a flying wizard tool. Chapter 872. Emoguna walked slowly across the Dragonbone Wasteland. Within her line of sight was a desolate land of resentment that was submerged in weeds. From time to time, she could see huge dragon bones buried in the yellow soil and sand in the distance. After thousands of years of wind and frost, There was no longer any trace of color on the white bones. Every time the cold wind blew through the gaps of the bones, there would be the mournful wails of the souls. And on such barren grass, yellow sand, and black soil, innumerable bizarre magical creatures wandered. They were entrenched in groups of 2s and 3s, tirelessly patrolling this wasteland that was cursed by the dragons. Every time there was an invasion from another race, they would swarm forward and use their fearless ferocity and terrifying numbers to keep the bone thieves on this land forever. According to legend, in the depths of the Dragonbone wasteland, there was a cursed Dragonbone altar, and the Dragonbone altar was built using the bones and dragon crystals of high-tier dragons. Therefore, even though they knew how terrifying the Dragonbone wasteland was, there were still wave after wave of bone thieves and treasure hunters that flocked here, hoping to dig out 1 or 2 dragon crystals and live a happy life without worries. Of course, since they came, they also stayed. Since then, there was an additional group of mournful wandering souls in the Dragonbone wasteland. Gunna, as the leader of the austere witches, naturally knew more about this legend than ordinary people. The Dragonbone altar did exist. But it was not in the wasteland, but hidden deep under the base of the Tower of Destiny. Want to dig out the Dragonbone altar? Sure. Let's topple the Tower of Destiny first. The reason why the Tower of Destiny was able to become the origin of the Destiny clan was because of the Dragonbone altar. It could be said that without the Dragonbone altar, the Tower of Destiny would not be as magical. Where did the Destiny Witch's innate ability to sense fate come from? It was the Dragonbone altar under the Tower of Destiny. Therefore, rather than saying that the Destiny Witches were the masters of the Dragonbone wasteland, it was more appropriate to say that they were the guardians of the Dragonbone altar. As for why the Destiny Witches had the Dragonbone altar, from the information stored by the Witch Council, it seemed to have something to do with the ancient Witch King. However, due to the passage of time and the loss of historical records, no one knew the exact details. Therefore, in her rage, Gunna no longer cared about the rules left behind in the ancient times and barged into the Dragonbone wasteland in a destructive manner. As if they had sensed the strong killing intent, the wraiths, monsters in the wilderness charged at Morgana, who was striding forward fearlessly. Following the fall of the Tower of Destiny, these wild beasts were no longer as strong as before. However, the order to protect the tower was still there. Hence, even though they knew that they were no match for the Tier 3 witch, the wild beasts and magical creatures still bravely charged towards the snowstorm. With their weak first-level strength, before they even reached within 100 meters of Gunna's body, they were already frozen into oddly shaped ice sculptures by a cold gust of wind. As Morgana strode forward, she left behind a 1,000-meter-wide path of ice and snow. On both sides of the path, there were sparkling and translucent ice sculptures of different postures. After brushing away the layer of snow on the surface of the ice sculptures, one could clearly see the ferocious beasts that were glaring at her through the half-meter-thick transparent ice crystals. Unfortunately, they had already lost their lives and became wandering wraiths in the Dragonbone wasteland. Along the way, there were no ferocious beasts or demonic creatures that could reach Gunna. Naturally, they were unable to stop her from advancing. However, as the majestic snowstorm approached the Tower of Destiny, the huge snowstorm that covered an area of about 2 kilometers immediately became a small vortex in front of the towering Tower of Destiny. It no longer looked as majestic and terrifying as before. Gunna stood proudly in front of the Tower of Destiny, allowing the madly spinning snowstorm to whip the dull greenish-gray body of the tower. She roared with a majestic voice, "Alice, come out!" The voice was so loud and majestic that it caused the nearby wilderness to tremble. Even a group of vengeful spirits flew up from the top of the tower, circling around the body of the tower and howling. Silently, a strange human figure composed of pure light and shadow appeared 100 meters in front of Gunna. As the light and shadow swayed, it gradually turned into Alice's appearance. "Madame Gunna, I didn't expect you to come to my Tower of Destiny in person. Welcome, welcome. Gunna separated her hands, and the snowstorm that coiled in front of her strangely parted to both sides, revealing her tall and vigorous figure. Alice, don't play dumb with me. How do you plan to end this war? Looking at the calm and composed Alice, the rage in Gunna's heart grew even stronger. Naturally, her tone was also exceptionally explosive. It seems to depend on your attitude. Alice still said softly with a smile, the chilly winter witches have no essential contradiction with us destiny witches. This time, it's purely a battle of wills. As long as Madame calms down, the war can end at any time. Humph, it's easy for you to say. But who will make up for the losses suffered by us chilly winter witches over the past month? Madame Gunna, the war between witches is like this. If you want to start a war, you have to bear the consequences of the war's backlash. In the previous battle, I have tried my best to suppress those senseless killings, otherwise. You mean? Gunna narrowed her eyes, and a wild snowstorm seemed to be brewing in her milky white pupils. Does it mean that my men can't beat your men? This time, for some reason, Alice, who had always had a soft figure, did not give in at all. Isn't that the case, Madame Gunna? Gunna's anger was even more intense, and even the snowstorm that was circling and flying became fiercer. I'm going to kill you! I'm going to kill you! Madame Gunna, don't forget that all our witch factions strictly prohibit internal killings, especially between chief-level witches. Any violator will be severely punished by the Witch Council. Why? Do you want to challenge this rule? I didn't forget. But, Alice, don't forget that our two families are now at war. If I challenge you now, can you refuse? Alice's eyes couldn't help but squint, and there was an indescribable brilliance in them. I can't refuse. It's good that you understand. Gunna snorted coldly. I don't want to bully a small rank 2 witch like you as a rank 3 witch. So, as long as you take the initiative to admit defeat and hand over the captive chilly winter witches, I accept your challenge. I can let bygones be bygones and let you continue. What did you say? Gunna was interrupted by Alice before she could finish her sentence. She seemed extremely surprised. I said, I accept your challenge. Alice said word by word with a stern expression. Do you understand what you are doing? Gunna's milky white pupils were cold, and her whole body exuded a fierce look. I only accepted your faction's challenge. Alice became relaxed again, however. You are rank 3 and I am rank 2. You don't mind if I bring a few subordinates, right? Who do you want to bring? Don't worry, I won't violate the witch's rules and bring those rank 3 dragons. I will only bring 4 subordinates, all of them rank 2. Is that okay? No problem. Somehow, Morgana was caught off guard by Alice's counterattack, causing her to stutter and not know how to react. A rank 2 witch leader dared to take the initiative to accept the challenge of a rank 3 witch leader. Even if she brought a few rank 2 subordinates, it was impossible for them to be the opponent. Faced with such a treacherous situation, Gunna was a little confused. I was the one who issued the challenge. Why is the other party more active than me? Is there a trap inside? But Alice has made it clear that she will not bring any rank 3 creatures, so how can she turn the tables? She can't possibly think that she can defeat a rank 3 witch with just 4 or 5 rank 2 subordinates, let alone a rank 3 witch leader, can she? Could it be that Alice also has a large number of rank 2 elemental puppets? It had to be said that the news of Grimm defeating a grade 3 sorcerer with a grade 2 sorcerer in the scattered tower forest had spread throughout the sorcerer continent. Even Gunna, who was in the north, had heard about it. However, there were too many prerequisites for such a victory. First, it must be a small arena like the duel arena. If there were no such restrictions, any rank 3 magus would have the initiative to retreat from the battlefield at any time if they were at a disadvantage. How could they be beaten to death by the despicable human wave tactic? Secondly, there were very few monsters like Grimm who could control so many elemental puppets. If not for his shocking number of rank 2 elemental puppets and his willingness to sacrifice them, he would not have been able to force a rank 3 magus into such a predicament. Of course, the decisive advantage in the battle was Grimm's Sea of Fire concealment. If not for his heaven-defying flame concealment ability, the rank 3 magus would not have been able to find his true body, and the battle would not have dragged on for so long. It was because of all these unexpected factors that the rank 3 magus had fallen to Grimm's despicable methods. However, the battlefield Missouri-Gunna had chosen was the vast space in front of the Tower of Destiny. There was no possibility of being surrounded by the enemy. Moreover, Gunna was different from the Crow of Death. She had a large number of area of effect ice spells, so she was not afraid of numbers. Chapter 873. Two groups of people stood in front of the Tower of Destiny. There was only one on the left. Naturally, it was the Tier 3 witch, Morgana, who had transformed into a snowstorm. There were 5 on the right. They were of different races, shapes, and personalities. From left to right, they were Alice, Mary, Bliss, Tigula, and Gru. All of them were Tier 2. Both sides stared at each other coldly from a distance of 400 meters, their eyes bursting with the desire for victory. "Are you sure you want to fight me with a group of Tier 2 witches?" Morgana's body was once again wrapped up in the wildly spinning snowstorm and floated in the air, almost impossible to see. However, her ice-cold voice penetrated through the whirling storm and reached the ears of the people on the other side. Although Morgana did not deliberately belittle the other party, the arrogance and contempt of a Tier 3 witch facing a Tier 2 opponent was unmistakable. Moreover, the momentum of both sides' appearance completely showed this point. 5 Tier 2 witches, one more low-key than the other, as if they did not want to attract the attention of the Tier 3 witches. Alice was still as calm as ever, allowing little Helen to float in front of her. The 2-meter-tall gray staff in her hand constantly shot silver chains of light into the bodies of several combat companions behind her. There was even a chain of light that penetrated the thick snowstorm barrier and entered Morgana's body. Of course, the blessing for her companions was premonition of fate. This way, Mary and the others could sense the direction of danger 2 or 3 fingers in advance during the battle. And the one that entered Morgana's body was Fate's severance. From this moment on, Morgana would lose the blessing of fate and become an abandoned child of fate. She would only return to normal when Fate's severance lost its effect. This was no less severe than the punishment of luck too. Although Morgana was not a witch of fate and was not directly favored by the power of fate. However, seeing that she could become the leader of the Winter Witches, it also showed that the blessing of fate she carried was not much less than Alice. But now, with Alice's Grade 2 fate rend, Morgana could only say goodbye to her path of fate for now. Before she defeated Alice, her past good luck would no longer exist. If she was not careful, she would also suffer the successive attacks of misfortune. Morgana, who was hidden in the blizzard, roared. Although she couldn't figure out what the chain of light had brought to her, she could vaguely sense that this world was strangely rejecting her. For a moment, even the ice particles that she usually controlled with ease suddenly became sluggish, and their circulation became a little sluggish. "Damn it, what did you do to me?" Gunna screamed angrily. She waved her hand and threw out a large ice cloud. Go to hell, this was a large white cloud made up of pure frozen air and ice mist. As soon as it flew out of the snowstorm, it pressed down on Alice and the others with the momentum of covering the sky and covering the earth. As Bai Yunfei flew, the frigid air around him began to crackle and crackle as he did so. Some tiny hailstones and frost quickly appeared, dyeing the pure white ice cloud with a layer of sky blue skirt. What a beautiful witchcraft! What a terrifying spell! Two extreme emotions appeared in everyone's hearts at the same time. Unfortunately, in the next second, everyone immediately became like chickens flying and dogs jumping, panicking as they used their own methods to avoid the rank 3 witch's attack. Alice gently flicked her finger, and a strange stone shining with silvery white light appeared above her head. As soon as the stone appeared, it refracted over 100 silver threads, completely enveloping Alice and little Helen. In the next second, with a flash of silver light, Alice had already disappeared without a trace. Among them, Mary's dynamic vision was the best. She tilted her head and glanced around, seeing Alice's figure quietly appear in a dark corner 2 kilometers away. You run fast." While snorting disdainfully, Mary quickly flapped the bat wings on her back and flew away in a strange slow motion. The white cloud and blue mist were clearly very close to Mary, but they were always unable to catch up to her flying figure by a hair's breadth. The balance between movement and stillness, fast and slow, was just right, causing everyone to sigh in admiration at Mary's strength. Alice and Mary had already run away, and the remaining 3 also began to use their special skills to escape. The insect witch, Bliss, was undoubtedly the most adept at escaping. His black robe suddenly collapsed, and the black insects turned into wisps of black smoke that entered the soil beneath his feet, disappearing in the blink of an eye. When the cloned brain Gru saw the might of the rank 3 witch's casual attack, he was greatly shocked. 500 degrees. The temperature at the core of the white cloud was already close to absolute zero, and the frost damage it could inflict on any living being was above 500 degrees. Although Gru had used expensive magic alloys when forging the magical machinery that carried his brain, it had high magic resistance. But if it wasn't necessary, he didn't want to face such a terrifying witchcraft attack head-on. A beam generator on the cloned brain Jelu's shoulder shot out a blinding beam of light, which quickly cut open a black crack in front of him. Jelu's 2 metal hands stretched out and tore the space crack a bit bigger, until it could accommodate him. Then, he went in headfirst. In the next second, the space 10 kilometers away suddenly lit up with a strong light, and the plane was torn apart once more. Gru forcefully bore through the void storm between the layers of space and emerged. In the blink of an eye, the only person left on the battlefield under the white cloud was the Goblin Ripper. F*ck me, F*ck me, F*ck me, you bunch of disloyal bastards! While cursing angrily, Tigul hurriedly activated the emergency escape device on the Goblin Ripper. Dozens of hollow metal tubes extended from the back of its tall body, and they quickly spat out bright yellow flames. The Goblin Ripper's heavy body that weighed more than 10 tons began to flee at a crazy speed. At least at this moment, the Goblin Ripper's flying speed was comparable to Mary's. However, without Mary's precise control, the Goblin Ripper could only maintain a straight line. If he made a mistake in his calculations and an obstacle appeared in his escape route, then Tigul, who was riding the Goblin Ripper, could only run into it with a look of despair. However, with its sturdy body and violent speed, even a stone mountain would be smashed to pieces by it. The pure white ice cloud landed on the ground, and hundreds of tons of extremely cold aura surged out, sweeping through the earth. Wherever the cold aura went, the earth froze and all things withered. A layer of several meters thick ice crystals quickly spread out in all directions. If someone looked down from the sky, they would see a huge ring of ice suddenly appear near the Tower of Destiny, turning everything within a 5-kilometer radius into a frigid world of death. Emogunna's long hair fluttered in the wind. She floated in the center of the crazily spinning ice storm, her milky white eyes staring unblinkingly at the proud and isolated figure at the edge of the huge ring of ice. The other party had teleported right at the edge of the ice cloud's eruption. If she had teleported 1 meter away, she might have been swept up by the extreme eruption of ice energy. But the other party had grasped Emogunna's strength perfectly. This meant that the other party had completely grasped the limits of Emogunna's strength and had completely seen through her. This undoubtedly caused Emogunna's hatred and irritation to increase. Gunna raised her hands high, constantly injecting the ice and snow wizard power in her body into the blizzard around her. Crystalline doors of ice and snow slowly opened up on the huge ring of ice. Following a series of roars, ice and snow guards formed from ice and snow wizard beasts scurried out of the ice doors, madly roaring as they charged at Alice. Gunna, who was floating in midair, brought her hands together. A large amount of extremely cold energy gathered between her palms, forming a terrifying ball of ice. Die! With a low shout, Gunna threw the ball of ice at Alice. Ice and snow wizard beasts swarmed over from below, while the ball of ice rained down countless ice arrows from above. The moment a level 3 which made her move, her attack was so powerful that it covered the sky and covered the earth. "I'll leave these small fries to you, Bliss," Alice said with a calm smile. She didn't even need to make a move. The little elemental elf Helen, who had been flying beside her, waved her small, matchstick-like magic wand and scattered an elemental barrier. Elemental nullification barrier. Cold immunity. Elemental disruption field. After setting up 5 or 6 elemental barriers in front of her in a single breath, little Helen flew to Alice's shoulder, panting. The ice arrows that spun and shot at her hit the translucent elemental barriers, causing them to tremble. But strangely, the elemental barriers that were as thin as a piece of paper actually blocked all the attack. Even the pervasive cold energy didn't seep in. A sharp hiss of dissatisfaction came from the void near Alice. Shortly after, 7 or 8 holes suddenly appeared in the ground in front of her, and a tide of black insects swarmed out, facing the ferocious ice and snow wizard beasts head-on. One black and one white, like 2 huge blobs of paint, invaded and infected each other, colliding and infiltrating each other. The ice and snow wizard beasts summoned by the rank 3 Winter Witch leader were not ordinary monsters. In addition to the hordes of rank 1 creatures, there was no lack of terrifying rank 2 dire beasts among them. The insects that collided head-on with them were not easy to deal with, either. Among the tens of thousands of black beetles, there were also 10 to 20 rank 2 dire beasts. They collided and tore at each other in a frenzy, creating hundreds of deaths at every moment. But with the constant cold energy behind them, it was obvious that the ice and snow wizard beasts had the upper hand on the battlefield. "Tygol, help it!" Alice was like an extremely calm commander, giving a simple and direct new order. Chapter 874. Dong, 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 a series of flames exploded in the horde of beasts. The raging flames and rapid shockwaves instantly engulfed all the ice wizard beasts. For a moment, the ice wizard beasts suffered heavy casualties. However, how could Morgana become the leader of the chilly winter witches by relying on these weak wizard beasts? Taking advantage of the time when the wizard beasts were entangled with the other party, she had already flown into the battlefield. With a wave of one hand, thousands of ice blades and snow swords flew out of the storm circle like a storm, shooting toward the enemy area. Looking at her posture, it seemed that she did not care whether she would accidentally hurt the group of ice wizard beasts below. Damn it, Bliss, who was hiding in the dark, cursed repeatedly, desperately commanding the insect swarm to turn into black smoke and flee to the periphery. The Grade 2 Void Predators flapped their wings and rushed out of the battlefield. After flying for a short distance, their figures gradually faded away. One could only vaguely see a strange shadow streaking across the void and quickly disappearing without a trace. The overwhelming snowstorm wrapped in ice blades and snow swords wreaked havoc on the land in front of them. Under the shooting of transparent ice crystals, a large number of ice wizard beasts were pierced and died a violent death. The black smoke that could not escape in time was also wrapped in it, once again turning into fist-sized black beetles with hard carapaces, sharp fangs, and 2 pairs of transparent elytra wings on their backs. In the wild snowstorm, these black beetles let out strange hisses, swaying left and right from the cold air, their carapaces covered with crystal-clear frost. As soon as the flying speed slowed down, The ice blades and snow swords that were following closely behind instantly strangled them. The entire battlefield was littered with insect corpses that fell like rain. The broken carapaces and broken limbs were frozen in a thick layer of ice before they could even land on the ground. Mary attracted her attention. Alice's body rippled with a silver halo, flashing every second as she wandered around the battlefield. Beside her, exquisite and gorgeous tarot cards rotated rapidly. But as they whirled round and round, the cards remained facing away from Alice, and danced round her in a strange and mysterious way. Every time Alice had a thought, she only needed to stretch out her hand, and a strange tarot card would automatically fly into her hand, and the thing sealed in the tarot card would instantly arm her. While Morgana was attacking, Alice had already summoned her witch's mask, Mercury belt, hourglass of time, and scepter of prophecy, arming herself from head to toe. The witch's mask was a destiny wizard artifact. It could obscure the enemy's consciousness and make them ignore the existence of the wearer. This also meant that if Morgana could not use her eyes to personally capture Alice's figure, all the spells she activated would be ineffective against Alice. The Mercury belt was another fate wizard tool. As long as Alice wore it, she would never be affected by any negative effects. With it, Morgana's large area of effect frost chi and frost freeze would not be able to trap Alice. The hourglass of time was also a powerful destiny wizard tool. If Alice was willing to pour the power of fate into it, she could push back the time on the battlefield to 1 to 5 seconds ago. With the hourglass of time, she would never have any regrets on the battlefield. As for the scepter of prophecy, it was the main battle wizard tool that Alice had the most control over. With the scepter of prophecy in her hand, the whole world was one-sided in Alice's eyes. And when Alice finished arming herself, a strange sonic boom suddenly sounded in the air. A blood-red lightning streaked across the sky, and suddenly pierced into the blizzard. With extreme speed and the protection of the blood-red energy, Mary directly penetrated the storm and rushed to Morgana's side before the all-pervasive freezing air could penetrate the blood shadow. Along with an ear-piercing explosion, the blood energy lingering around Mary's body condensed into pieces of blood-red ice under the invasion of the cold air, and fell to the sky with a crackling sound. Mary was like a butterfly dancing around a candlelight, and hurriedly attacked Morgana several times. But when she saw the berserk power of ice gathering around her, she hurriedly broke through the blizzard and escaped. In just a short period of time, the blood energy in Mary's body had been reduced by more than 30%. As soon as she escaped from Morgana's attack range, she desperately stuffed blood crystals into her mouth. Gru, attack this, and here. While Morgana's attention was attracted by Mary, Alice quickly issued a battle order to the cloned brain Gru that was hiding at the periphery. Although the cloned brain Gru's combat ability was not as strong as the Goblin Ripper, it was definitely second to none when it came to the abundance of magic energy. After all, no one would want to stuff a terrifying magical furnace into their stomach. After receiving Alice's battle guidance, several red dots mysteriously appeared on Morgana's enormous ice storm that could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. It was the area that Alice had instructed it to attack. The cloned brain Gru let out a low roar, and its 5-meter-tall heavy body suddenly crouched down. A half-meter-thick black metal cannon extended from its back. In the next moment, a terrifying amount of magic energy poured into it, and with a silent tremor, it turned into 7 energy beams that accurately hit the red dots. The gigantic blizzard tornado suddenly came to a halt. If Morgana had not sensed that something was amiss and used her powerful ice wizard power to hold it in place, it was likely that the violent attack of the cloned brain Jellu would have been enough to destroy this blizzard tornado ring. Just like how Grimm liked to set fire everywhere he went on the battlefield, with the help of the blizzard tornado, most of Morgana's ice spells would be greatly enhanced. Moreover, with the blizzard tornado, anyone who wanted to get close to her would have to pay a heavy price. With that attack, the cloned brain Gru, who was hiding 7 miles away, was instantly targeted by Morgana. The other few Grade 2 Magi were only troublesome to deal with, and could not pose any threat to Morgana. However, the ferocious attack of the tin can had almost destroyed her defensive spell. This made Morgana immediately raise it to the top of her priority list to get rid of. Hence, with Morgana's clear and furious roar, a few large area of effect ice spells swept towards the cloned brain Jellu with an earth-shattering force. "Damn it! Bastard! Protect me!" Gru frantically cried for help through the mental link, while the cloned brain put up countless defensive force field. He dodged left and right between the berserk ice spells, desperately escaping to the periphery. However, how could the elemental spells of a Grade 3 Magus be so easy to deal with? The berserk ice spells froze the earth and the sky, and even sealed Gru's metallic body in a thick layer of ice crystals. With a gust of frigid wind, all the ice crystals instantly shattered and decomposed, returning to the tiniest ice particles. The cloned brain Gru, who had been alive and kicking just a moment ago, also shattered into pieces of ice, and could no longer be found. All that was left was a magic furnace flickering with a faint blue glow. Less than a quarter of an hour had passed, and after only 3 rounds of attacks and defenses, one of the 4 helpers Alice had brought had died a heroic death. The remaining few could not help but feel a chill in their hearts. Ha 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 ha! A bunch of Grade 2 Magi dared to come out and die. Morgana, who had succeeded, laughed wildly. However, halfway through her laughter, she was like a hen whose neck had been grabbed, and her laughter came to an abrupt halt. Alice, who was wandering around the periphery of the battlefield, still had a calm expression. The hourglass hanging from her waist suddenly blossomed with a dazzling 5-colored radiance, and then quickly returned to normal. At the place where the cloned brain Gru had died, a small and exquisite hourglass of light suddenly appeared, and the sand of time within it began to rewind in a strange manner. When the hourglass of light began to rewind, the miraculous laws of the plane extracted billions of metal particles from the surrounding ice shards and the ice crystals within a radius of a few hundred meters. Then, like building blocks, they surrounded the magic furnace and pieced them together according to some rules and order. It was as if someone had pressed a rewind button on the entire space-time, and the metallic body that had been smashed into smithereens was pieced back together in front of everyone. When the cloned brain Gru, who couldn't be more dead, reappeared in the protective barrier of the metallic body, the hourglass finally exhausted the sand of time and started to fade away. "You bastards, you actually watched me die. I'm going to curse you. Why am I still alive?" The distorted view of space-time, as well as the strange information crazily surging into his brain from the laws of the plane, caused the newly revived cloned brain Gru to be at a loss. "Why aren't you running? Are you ready to die again?" At this moment, Alice's delicate voice resounded in the cloned brain Gru's mind. The cloned brain Gru immediately turned around and ran without hesitation. Damn, what kind of spell was this? How could it be so powerful? It could even save a fellow whose body had been smashed into smithereens? Mary, Tygol, and Bliss watched this miraculous scene from the shadows, and the shock in their hearts was indescribable. However, amidst the shock, it was also accompanied by overwhelming ecstasy. Damn, with such support by my side, do I still need to be afraid of death? Without the need to shout and cheer, the Scarlet Magi's fighting spirit instantly exploded. While they were ecstatic, Morgana's heart was filled with shock. Damn it, damn it, damn it! Was this the true strength of the Destiny Witches? It was indeed as miraculous and profound as recorded in the historical records. However, since they had already become opponents, she absolutely could not give her enemies a chance to turn the tables. After making up her mind, Morgana's fighting spirit instantly exploded, and she once again aimed her attacks at Alice, who was flashing around. Alice was the core of today's battle. If she was not defeated, who knew how many more miracles her miraculous Destiny Witches could create? Chapter 875. As everyone knew, the Fate Witches were never part of the fighting rank. Thus, most Fate Witches were harmless creatures in the eyes of others. But today, Alice had only revealed her abilities for the first time, and Gunna had already experienced the terror of a high-grade Fate Witch. Due to the existence of the Fate Split, Gunna's luck had been very bad from the start of the battle. This had caused her to miss many good opportunities to quickly kill the enemy. As a veteran witch who had advanced to grade 3 more than 200 years ago, failure to cast a spell should not have happened to her. But from the start of the battle until now, Gunna had already failed twice in less than half an hour. The first time was when the thread of the silk handkerchief fell into her mouth, causing her to make a mistake while chanting the spell. This caused her to miss the moment when Mary's body suddenly stagnated after breaking into the storm's circle to give her a head-on blow. The second time was when an explosive countercurrent within the storm circle hit the ice shield outside her body, and the ice shield just happened to be exhausted at that moment, collapsing on its own. Thus, Gunna, who was disturbed by the countercurrent, missed a good opportunity to directly kill Alice. These two mistakes seemed to have a cause and effect, which would only make people feel that it was a wonderful coincidence and accident. But Gunna knew very well that this was not a coincidence or accident, but the true embodiment of luck after the Fate Split. Luck was something that could never be seen or touched. But it had to be admitted that it really existed. The effect of luck +1 and luck -1 on a person was not as simple as rolling the die more or less, but it would truly affect the coupling between her and this plane's world system. One had to know that the consciousness of the plane was an amalgamation of tens of thousands of living beings and billions of non-living elemental basic substances within the plane. A fellow with luck -1 would feel the great malice behind all things in this plane of existence when he interacted with any matter in this plane of existence. Any intelligent creature that he met would naturally feel disgust and hostility upon seeing him for the first time. And the ferocious birds and beasts that he met would not hesitate to list him as a target of attack. Apart from that, even those non-living substances would cause trouble for him everywhere. An inconspicuous pebble that appeared on his path, a wooden thorn that wasn't polished properly on the wooden stool, a transparent fishbone mixed in the fish soup, and at the critical moment of mixing a high-grade magic medicine, he was absent-minded. Those who had luck, one would feel that the entire world was against them, causing them to stumble and trap them. None of the things they prayed for would succeed, but the things they feared would definitely happen. This was the true power of luck 1. Meanwhile, Gunna was currently suffering from a luck -2 penalty. To be honest, if she wasn't a grade 3 witch but an ordinary person, she wouldn't even need to kill or arrange anything. Just the series of accidents caused by luck 2 would be enough to make her wish she was dead. On the battlefield, Gunna made a lot of strange mistakes, and wasted a lot of opportunities that could have ended the battle quickly. This was the reason why this evenly matched battle was able to last for a long time. During this period of time, the four who were originally suspicious and distrustful of each other actually started to cooperate and rely on each other to a certain extent under Alice's super support. Among the 5 grade 2 witches, Alice relied on her unique ability to see the big picture and her strange fate witchcraft to become the commander. Mary relied on her extraordinary speed and agility to become a fully deserving assassin and firefighter. Bliss, on the other hand, relied on his Zerg swarm and his sharp and terrifying Zerg war to become a hitman, resisting the ice wizard beasts of the rank 3 witches. Goblin Tigu relied on the powerful combat power of the Goblin Ripper, and became the main attacker to break through Gunna's outer defenses. The cloned brain Jelu relied on the magic furnace in his body and the powerful magic cannons around him to take on the role of a long-range heavy gunner. These fellows originally occupied their own areas, each with their own unique abilities and areas of expertise. But today, they gathered by Alice's side as one and truly displayed their strongest combat power. The battle was fierce and strange, and there was something different about it everywhere. Every time Mo Gunna used a powerful ice witchcraft, it was time for the 5 Grade 2 witches to compete in terms of survival. Against a Grade 3 witch, a moment of carelessness could be the difference between life and death. In this battle that lasted for 1.5 hours, Mary died 3 times, Tigga died 5 times, and Jellu died once. On the other hand, Alice, who had many trump cards, and Bliss, who was the best at hiding, didn't die even once. In the 41st minute, the ice storm tornado that Morgana had conjured was destroyed by the cloned brain Jellu's powerful magic cannons. From then on, Mary was like a fly that could not be rid of, always accompanying Morgana. As long as she revealed the slightest opening, Mary would use her crazy dual attribute attacks to break her ice shield. Even though Tiggu was not far away to attract the enemy's firepower, and even though Mary's 29 points of agility allowed her to advance and retreat freely, she still couldn't avoid dying at Morgana's hands 3 times. The first time was because she was too greedy. At the critical moment when Mo Gunna's ice shield was about to be destroyed, she didn't retreat and was frozen into an ice sculpture by the sudden eruption of the ring of ice. Using guerrilla tactics in front of Morgana, a 3-second freeze was enough for Mary to die 10 times. The second time was when Mary carried out a melee attack and was turned into a sieve by the furious Morgana's random frost ray. The third and final time was when Mo Gunna, who had activated her ice bloodline, used the terrifying Lonesome Winter spell to freeze her to death. It had to be known that after Mo Gunna activated her ice bloodline and cast the terrifying Grade 3 spell Lonesome Winter, she could create a domain of extreme cold in half a kilometer around her. This time, Mary and Tiggu were hit at the same time, and both were frozen to death in the gorgeous and exquisite world of ice. If it wasn't for Alice's perfect control of the hourglass of time, Mo Gunna's counterattack would have killed at least one of them. After experiencing several deaths, the 5-man team finally figured out a few tricks to deal with Mo Gunna. Most of Mo Gunna's ice spells were powerful and had astonishing freezing effects. However, these spells required 3 to 7 seconds to cast, and there were some obvious signs before they were cast. As long as they grasped these tricks and Alice's prophecy scepter could predict Mo Gunna's true target every time she attacked. With these factors added together, the 5-man team had the best chance to escape. If Mo Gunna wanted to kill someone in an instant, Alice would notify the other party in advance. That person wouldn't need to think about attacking, and would only need to run away with all his might. If Mo Gunna wanted to activate a powerful large-scale spell, Alice would be able to predict it in advance and report the best safe distance. Thus, the 5-man team retreated to a so-called safe distance and easily used long-range spells to attack Mo Gunna, who couldn't move easily. After being tormented like this several times, Mo Gunna flew into a rage, but there was nothing she could do. That Alice was simply too annoying. Not only was she slippery and difficult to catch, but she had also turned the other 4 guys into slippery mice, running around and burrowing around her. Every time, she would hide in a place where she couldn't use her full strength, causing most of the ice spells to become meaningless and beautiful fireworks. When fighting against such a group of people, even though single-target spells were powerful, it was difficult to hit them by name. Only a large area of effect rank 3 witchcraft could deal significant damage to them. However, level 3 spells weren't cabbages. Even though Mo Gunna had an ice-cold bloodline and her ice wizard power recovered quickly, she couldn't withstand such an extravagant use. Unknowingly, Mo Gunna had fallen from being a dominator of the battlefield to a panting mouse hunter. Her ability to create death pressure on her opponents was getting weaker and weaker. Of course, as the leader of the level 3 Winter Witches, how could Mo Gunna only have this little ability? In the middle of the battle, Mo Gunna actually summoned a level 3 Snowman King in a fit of rage. This was a fellow that looked like a savage. It was 4 meters tall, with 4 strong arms and thick gray fur. Its face was flat and crude, and it was best at throwing snowballs. What it threw was not the soft frost ball of a level 1 Magus, but a terrifying snowball with a diameter of 1 meter and a weight of half a ton. When it hit the ground, it created a strong splash effect. The snowball had 150 degrees of physical attack power, 120 degrees of freezing damage, and 70 degrees of ice crystal splash damage at 110 meters. When the Berserk Yeti King attacked everyone at an extremely fast speed of 8 shots per second, the cooperation of the 5-man team was successfully disrupted. At the crucial moment, the Goblin Tigu made a huge sacrifice, using himself to attract Emogunus' firepower. The rest of the team used this time to launch a frenzied attack on the Snowman King. In the end, under the guidance of Alice's weakness, the cloned Brain Jellu used the full power of the magic furnace to create a beam of energy that pierced through the Snowman King's chest, shattering the core of its consciousness into pieces. Of course, the Bug Lich Bliss contributed 7 Void Predators to break through the Snowman King's chest in advance. This was also the key to Jellu's ability to kill the enemy in one shot. Chapter 876. The battle had been stopped. Seeing that their leader could not win, the austere witches led by Thero immediately intervened in the battle and took the dejected Morgana away. According to the agreement, Alice and the others naturally won the battle. Although Morgana was not directly defeated and saved some face for the austere witches, the battle between the Witches of Destiny and the austere witches ended with the defeat of the austere witches. Such an unexpected outcome left the entire northern lands flabbergasted for a moment. However, the Crimson family had also successfully overcome their identity crisis. Although most of the northern witches were still dissatisfied with the relationship between Grimm and Alice, it was difficult for them to make a fuss about the identity of the Crimson family. Of course, in this battle, the other witch factions may not have suffered any losses, but the austere witches had suffered a terrible loss. Not only did they lose nearly half of their territory, they even lost more than a third of the family's most important resource points. If not for the fact that the austere witches had accumulated over the years, there would have been a faction crisis. After that, in order to redeem their captured sisters, the austere witches were forced to pay a large number of high-level wizard weapons. This could be considered to have alleviated the awkwardness of the Crimson family's lack of master alchemists. Although Grimm had mastered some alchemy, he put most of his energy into the creation of magic puppets and magic tattoos, and his performance in the creation of wizard weapons was mediocre. There were not many equipment and items seized from the giant dragon's treasure that were suitable for wizards, so the arrival of this batch of spoils had indeed solved a big problem for the Crimson family. The battle this time seemed to have a huge impact on Mary. After returning from the Tower of Destiny, she locked herself in the secret room of the Flame Monarch's wizard pagoda, secretly preparing something. Grimm heard the news while he was enjoying his fire dragon ribs. Grimm only stopped eating his knife and fork for a moment when he heard such a major event that could determine the future of the family. After a short "oh," he tilted his head and thought for a moment, then continued with his unfinished business. The Crimson family's current scale could not be supported by a single level 3 wizard. So if the Crimson family wanted to continue developing and expanding, it was essential to improve the family's strength. Apart from Grimm, a large number of Scarlet Magi were needed to contribute to the family business. Only then would the Crimson family have a future. If they relied on their fists to conquer the world, then when Grimm fell, the Crimson family would fall apart. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. Now Alice, Mary, and Bliss stood up and had their own glory and pride. This was what Grimm had been hoping for the most. As the biggest boss of the Crimson family, now that he had a powerful subordinate who could share his burdens, Grimm could naturally spend more time on things that he was interested in. Using the opportunity to eat, Grimm quickly browsed through the rank 3 spells that the AI chip had recently optimized. He could not help but feel a surge of pride in his heart. Berserk Fireball, Rank 3, Fire Single Target Spell. Chanting time, 1 to 2 seconds cooldown. 5 seconds consumes 2 spiritual force. Attack power, 310 to 330 degrees. Killing range, 20 to 30 meters. Comes with fire poison and ice flames. Lava armor, rank 3, fire and earth dual element defensive spell. Chanting time, 2 to 4 seconds cooldown. 45 seconds consumes 3 spiritual force. Physical defense, 450 degrees. Elemental defense, 300 degrees. Additional fire damage reflect, Flaming Gate, rank 3, fire summoning spell. Chanting time, 8 to 15 seconds cooldown. 15 minutes consumes 7 spiritual force. Summons a fire creature with a total of 1,270 degrees of fire energy, can summon a level 3 giant fire elemental. Molten Fire World, rank 3, fire AoE spell. Chanting time, 10 to 16 seconds cooldown. 50 seconds consumes 6 spiritual force. Summons a 100-meter * 80-meter pillar of flame. Attack power within 30 meters of the core area, 450 to 480 degrees. The power of the flames decreases outward. Every 10 meters, the power decreases by 50 degrees. Meteor Burst, rank 3, fire and earth dual element single target spell. Chanting time, 8 to 12 seconds cooldown. 35 seconds consumes 4 spiritual force. Fire damage, 260 to 280 degrees. Physical damage, 220 to 240 degrees. Killing range, 20 to 30 meters. Additional 40 degrees of earth splash damage, flame teleportation, short distance. Rank 3, fire and earth dual element mobile spell. Chanting time, 3 to 5 seconds cooldown. 25 seconds consumes 3 spiritual force. Allows the caster to teleport to an area with fire runes. Maximum teleportation distance, 3,000 meters. These 5 spells were the rank 3 spells that Grimm had derived and optimized through the AI chip. They were not generic rank 3 spells. Hence, if Grimm submitted them to the Wind of Freedom's Hall of Knowledge, there was a high chance that he would be rewarded with contribution points. However, these were battle spells that Grimm had prepared for himself. If he made their detailed data public, it would be easy for his enemies to grasp the core data of his battles. From this point alone, it was impossible for Grimm to make them public. As for the first elemental equipment, it had been polished and optimized over the past few days. It already possessed some basic combat capabilities. However, it lacked the support of the magic furnace. Ordinary Grade 2 elemental puppet crystal cores could only sustain it for 5 minutes. Grimm had used the energy resonance sequence of 3 Class 2 elemental puppet crystal cores to allow him to fight for a quarter of an hour. This made Grimm even more eager to obtain a new batch of Keira's alloy. The first 9-headed puppet, created by most of the Goblin engineers, was about to go offline, but there was still no progress on the magic furnace that was the energy core. As a result, Grimm had been visiting the trading hall of the Winds of Freedom's mental illusion more frequently these days. However, the frightening price of Keira's alloy and ores could only make Grimm flinch. Perhaps it was because of Grimm's continuous inquiries about Keira's alloy over the past year. He had finally attracted someone who was interested. On this day, Grimm had just finished his daily meditation and entered the spiritual illusion once again. In the trading hall of Door 1, he was stopped by a tall, skinny man who looked extremely young. "You are Flame?" The tall, skinny man sized Grimm up carefully. Flame was a special codename that Grimm had given himself. After all, in this spiritual illusion, he needed a fake identity to communicate and trade with others. "I am Flame. What business do you have with me? I have a mission here that you might be interested in." The tall, skinny man smiled mysteriously. "Mission? Aren't those things supposed to be in the mission hall?" Grimm could not help but narrow his eyes. In the spiritual illusion, his appearance was that of a humanoid flame, and his face was covered by a golden mask. It was difficult for others to discover his true identity through these characteristics. You don't have to care about that. Take a look at this mission first. The tall, skinny man flicked his finger, and a purplish-black ball of light floated in front of Grim. Beep. Strange data detected. Host, please indicate whether to accept? Accept. As a bone-chilling sensation flowed into his body of consciousness, a strange set of data formed in his mind. Banishing creatures from Molten City, Grade 3, Mission Creator. Molten City Lord Mission Details. Molten City, located in the Skeeties region, has been invaded by fiery creatures from another world for the past 2 years. So far, 1 Grade 2 wizard, 3 Grade 1 wizards, and a number of apprentices have died. The underground mine of Molten City has also been severely affected. Mission reward: 50,000 magic crystals, 1,200 merit points. Mission requirement: recruit 2 Grade 3 wizards. Grim skimmed through it briefly and shook his head in disinterest. These days, he was still consolidating his strength after advancing to Grade 3. It was not suitable for him to leave his family and carry out any dangerous missions. Thus, he refused without hesitation. The tall, skinny man seemed to have been prepared for this. He spoke to Grim in a low voice. I heard that you are searching for Keira's alloy everywhere. Grim was stunned when he heard this and stopped in his tracks. You have news about Keira's alloy? I won't hide it from you. The underground mine of Molten City produces Keira's alloy. However, it mainly produces Eternium Oregon Keiras, or is only a byproduct. Grim squinted his eyes. You are the master of Molten City? The expert smiled faintly. The master of Molten Castle is a Grade 4 wizard, and I'm just a hired wizard working for him. Grim carefully sensed the other party. Although he did not know the other party's identity, he was definitely a Grade 3 wizard. Grim hesitated for a moment, but he could not help but ask, Is there anything else you can tell me about this mission? That beast broke into Molten City 2 years ago. Its origins are very strange. It seems to have entered Molten City through the underground tunnel of the Lava Sea. Once it arrived, it occupied the Lava Sea near the underground mine and often harassed the wizard beasts mining. So far, Molten Fire City has lost countless people and equipment. Did you not take any measures to kill it? It seems to be a fire creature with intelligence. It's extremely cunning and never goes deep into Molten City. It only eats Eternium or near the mine. The master of the city wanted to capture it, but as soon as the master approached, it would hide in the depths of the Lava Sea and never show its head again. Once the master left, it returned to its old ways and came to cause trouble. These days we've suffered a lot. Has its strength been confirmed? We've already sent people to check if it's a mid-grade or high-grade rank 3 fire creature. If it wasn't for the environment being especially suitable for it, we would have killed any other rank 3 fire creature long ago. After hearing this, Grim could not help but lower his head and ponder. It seemed like the other party had found him because of his identity as a fire elemental magus. Seeing that Grim was tempted, the tall, skinny man could not help but add more information. Chapter 877. Grim arrived at Rain City 3 days later. The Skeeties region where Molten City was located was tens of thousands of miles away from the Alovis region where Grim was. He had to cross 4 different regions on the way, and it was impossible for him to travel by flying wizard beasts. Hence, he had to rely on the Silver Alliance's floating ship. The treatment that Grim received in Rain City this time was vastly different from the last time he visited. Just as he dismounted his manticore, before he even reached his temporary residence, the manager of the Wizard Tower had already sent a magus to wait for him at the entrance. Lord Grim, what brings you to Rain City? If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. The person in charge of receiving him was a Grade 2 magus. Most of his exposed skin had been replaced by a strange silvery white metal, and his appearance was somewhat terrifying. I have something to do in the Skeeties region, and I'd like to take a floating ship here. There was nothing to keep secret about this mission, so Grimm did not try to hide it. No problem. There'll be a floating ship heading west the day after tomorrow. I'll arrange it for you. Also, the Magus smiled, there'll be a Magus gathering in the Golden Hall of the Wizard's Pagoda tonight. I wonder if you understood. Send someone to inform me when the gathering starts. All right, I'll inform them now. With Grimm's promise, the Magus immediately left, beaming with joy. It was obvious that the higher-ups of the Rain City Wizard Tower were looking forward to Grimm's arrival. It had to be known that more than half of the Alovis region, where Rain City was located, had fallen into the hands of the Crimson family. The rise of the Crimson family seemed unstoppable. Under these circumstances, building a good relationship with Grimm would undoubtedly be beneficial to the development of Rain City. Hence, whether it was for public or private reasons, the higher-ups of the Wizard's Pagoda had to put on a high profile. A Grade 2 sorcerer might still be suppressed and attacked, but for a Grade 3 sorcerer, other than those old monsters who hid behind the scenes and did not show themselves easily, they were already considered to be one of the top powers in the sorcerer world. This was especially so for combat magi like Grimm, who had displayed great strength. They could only be roped in, not suppressed. Hence, the higher-ups of the Wizard's Pagoda had a completely different attitude towards Grimm's arrival. They even seemed to want to mend the cracks in their relationship. Of course, Grimm was well aware of this. He also wanted to make use of this opportunity to get in touch with the high-level magi in the Pagoda Forest. As night fell, the Golden Hall was filled with distinguished wizards from all levels of the wizards of the Pagoda. The regular gathering of the Wizards of the Wizard's Pagoda was supposed to be held 5 days later, but the upper echelons of the Wizard's Pagoda had no choice but to bring it forward due to the arrival of an esteemed guest. The wizards that were stationed at the Wizard's Pagoda in Rain City had already found out who the mysterious guest of honor was through various means. Hence, they had arrived at the Golden Hall early in the morning and occupied a better spot. They chatted softly with familiar friends while waiting for the arrival of the guest of honor. Some of the wizards who hadn't personally experienced it asked in a low voice, while the wizards who had witnessed it began to describe it in detail, as if they had seen it for themselves. A Tier 2 sorcerer defeating a Tier 3 sorcerer by himself. Such a thing should have been impossible, yet it had happened in Rain City. Therefore, they felt honored for a very, very long time. A group of musicians dressed in exquisite clothing were performing elegant music in a corner of the hall. Waiters and waitresses in well-ironed attire shuttled between the wizards with smiles on their faces, serving cups of fine wine and plates of pastries on exquisite trays. The male and female wizards in robes of various colors were casually standing in the corners of the hall, chatting and laughing as they toasted each other. A few female wizards with good looks and figures were dressed in unusually sexy attire, quickly becoming the center of attention in the banquet hall. There were only 3 Level 3 wizards in the Wizard's Pagoda in Rain City. One of them had gone to the south to handle some personal affairs and had not returned. Hence, there were only 2 Level 3 wizards in the Golden Hall. One was the body-tempering wizard Zoster, and the other was the earth element wizard Logner. They occupied the center of the hall, surrounded by a group of vassal wizards. They chatted casually as they scanned the entrance of the hall. "How much do you know about this wizard Grimm? I heard that he is not even 200 years old this year. Is this information reliable?" The last time Grimm came to the Wizard's Pagoda in Rain City, the body-tempering wizard Zoster was not in the pagoda, so he did not come into contact with Grimm. Hence, he was skeptical of the rumors. The earth element wizard Logner held a glass of red wine in his hand, gently swirling it, a faint smile on his face. "I don't know much more than you do, and it's all just rumors of the past. However, he is indeed very young. The rumor that he is not even 200 years old could very well be true." Hiss! Zoster could not help but gasp. Not even 200 years old. Doesn't that mean He has a high chance of advancing to level 4? Just based on time and talent. He might very well become a level 4 wizard in the future. Logner's smile did not diminish and he chuckled. I'm afraid those fellows who want to suppress this young wizard will have a huge headache. Zoster also laughed dryly. Everyone knew about the conflict between Grimm and his old family, the Cerubo family. Now that Grimm's Crimson family was rising in power in the Alovis area, the Cerubo family would probably have the most trouble at this moment. In the past, there might have been many opportunists who tried to suppress Grimm out of respect for the great wizard Cerubo. But now, he had become a level 3 wizard, and he had shown the potential to advance to level 4. Under such circumstances, which idiot would dare to offend a future tier 4 sorcerer? Before the Cerubo family could produce a new level 4 wizard, they would have to think of a way to reconcile with Grimm. The great wizard Cerubo was indeed powerful, but it was a pity that he was in the outer realm and could not return to the Magus world. This meant that the Cerubo family had lost their only chance of suppressing Grimm. Of course, if Grimm was not stupid, he would not have taken the initiative to provoke the Cerubo family. After all, the Cerubo family had 2 level 3 bloodline magi overseeing it, and their strength was among the top in the central continent. Seeing the 2 level 3 magi chatting, the many level 1 and 2 magi around them could only smile apologetically and listen in silence. At this moment, those who could speak in front of the 2 level 3 magi were naturally those closest to them. Teacher, the Wizard's Pagoda just received some news from the north a few days ago. It seems to have something to do with Lord Grimm. The one who spoke was a middle-aged magus at level 2. He had a serious expression on his face. He was the disciple of the level 3 earth element magus Logner. Tell me about it. Logner nodded. Yes. This news came from the Black Rose Merchant Guild in the north. It said that the battle between the Witches of Destiny and the Winter Witches has ended. Teacher, can you guess who won? Normally, it should be the Winter Witches who won. But since you're asking, could it be that the Witches of Destiny won? Logner could not help but narrow his eyes. Yes, teacher. The news they brought back was very clear. The Witches of Destiny won. West, who was listening by the side, could not help but frown. We're talking about Grimm. What northern witches are you talking about? Could it be that those northern witches are related to Grimm? Logner shook his head and sighed. West, you're still too out of touch with the news. You might not know this, but the young Grimm has a close relationship with the Witches of Destiny. It's said that the current leader of the Witches of Destiny is Grimm's secret lover. Don't you think this news is shocking? What? There's such a thing? West's eyes immediately widened, his face full of shock and disbelief. The leader of the Northern Witches was regarded as a grade 4 witch in the scattered forest of towers. To be related to them, the resources, the wealth, the power. You could simply ask for anything. For a moment, even West was a little jealous of that lucky kid. Lord Grimm has arrived, as the deacon apprentice at the entrance of the hall loudly announced his name. All the magi in the hall stopped talking and turned to look at the entrance. There, a tall, young, and handsome man strolled in. A pair of dark eyes swept across the crowd and fell straight on the 2 grade 3 magi. The 2 grade 3 magi immediately raised their glasses and nodded in greeting. Grimm strode towards the 2 of them. The vassal magi gathered around the 2 grade 3 magi tactfully retreated to the sides, leaving a place for the 3 to talk in peace. Welcome, Wizard Grimm. Thank you for your kind intentions. I'm also very honored to pay a visit. After a simple exchange of greetings, the 3 gathered together and chatted happily. The topics they talked about did not involve any cooperation or communication between the 2 parties. Instead, it was all related to the things that a magus needed to pay attention to after advancing to grade 3. From this aspect, it could be seen that the 3 of them were talking on the surface, but in secret, the 2 veteran magi were silently teaching and guiding the new magus, Grimm. Chapter 878. 2 days later. A flying ship belonging to the Scattered Pagoda Forest Association rose from a tall wooden platform. It slowly adjusted its course and began to accelerate towards the west. As one of the passengers, Grim mixed into the crowd on the deck. Those who could board the airship were either magi or nobles of high status. Although there were many people on the deck, it was still orderly and refined. In the Magus world, there were many large organizations, so there was no fixed standard for magi to wear. In terms of color, there were no restrictions. However, under normal circumstances, elemental magi liked to wear light and soft robes due to their weaker physique. Body tempering and bloodline magi had a wider range of clothing. From light leather armor with decent defense to metal armor with astonishing defense, there were almost no taboos. Hence, it was difficult to judge a magus' true strength just by looking at their attire. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Grim did not wear his usual crimson magus robe. Instead, he chose a normal black robe with a flight spell. Hence, from his appearance, it was easy for normal people to mistake him for a low-ranked magus. Grim did not have any interest in conversing with others. He held the railing of the ship and quietly looked down at the natural scenery below him. He was still thinking about the series of meetings and private conversations he had over the past 2 days. In public, no one would talk about such secretive matters. However, after Grim returned to his residence, a large number of magi came to visit him. Among them were 2 representatives from Grade 3 magi. It was obvious that these fellows were quite optimistic about the Crimson family's development. They all represented the families or organizations behind them to propose extremely favorable conditions for cooperation and transactions with Grim. Some of the conditions proposed by the collaborators were so favorable that it was as if they were giving the Crimson family great benefits for free. They were using this method to form a relationship with this rising family. However, the delicious bait had a hook that was difficult to swallow. These fellows who were willing to sacrifice resources and magic crystals to join the Crimson family's war chariot were definitely carrying a huge burden on their shoulders. Once they swallowed their bait, it would mean that they were carrying a certain amount of trouble for the other party. If their enemy or organization was a small or medium-sized magus family, the Crimson family would naturally agree without hesitation. However, if this trouble involved a few high-ranked magi, then the Crimson family would be asking for trouble. Hence, Grim did not slack off during the 2 days he stayed in the Wizard's Pagoda in Rain City. He had been interacting with all sorts of people. With Grim's information, as well as the guidance of the 2 Grade 3 magi, he naturally knew how to deal with these uninvited fellows. After sending them to the Scarlet Butler Gargamel, who had been left behind to guard the blazing flame monarch, Grim boarded the airship alone and began his journey alone. The distance between Alovis and Tixtet was about 110,000 kilometers. Even with the speed of an airship, it would take half a month to get there. Therefore, Grim could easily enjoy the freedom of the journey. When the airship rose into the sky and began to fly above the clouds, the temperature on the flight deck would suddenly drop very low. And magi of the airship, Magus Maggle to Magus to the airship to the Magus's Tower's ship. No matter how thick their clothes were, they could not withstand the low temperature. Hence, they hid in the cabins protected by the elemental barrier. There were a dozen or so magi scattered around. Judging from their clothes and mental energy ripples, most of them were Grade 1 magi. There was no one worth paying attention to. Only a bald, white-haired old magus at the corner of the deck saw Grim's gaze and immediately nodded and bowed, showing a fawning expression. With the help of the AI chip, Grim reacted instantly. It seemed that this fellow had the chance to attend the Wizard's Pagoda's welcoming banquet and had seen him before. Grim did not have the time to deal with such a small fry. His gaze paused on the old man for a moment before looking elsewhere. The old magus did not dare to disturb Grim due to his status. He turned to talk to another magus. There were so many magi that there were naturally all sorts of people with different personalities and hobbies. Some were good at talking, while others were cold and distant. After being rebuffed twice, the old sorcerer actually chatted with a young sorcerer and a young sorcerer. They were obviously a couple, and their relationship was so close that it was enviable. After a while, Grimm, who was a little tired of the scenery below him, tidied up his robe and walked into the cabin. The old magus who was chatting had been staring at Grimm from the corner of his eyes. Seeing him leave, he slowly let out a sigh of relief. Although it was an honor to bump into a legendary magus, the mental pressure was also immense. As if noticing the old magus's reaction, the couple could not help but sneak a glance at Grimm. Seeing the tall and broad figure of the old magus disappear into the cabin, the young and charming female magus could not help but look at him with an infatuated gaze. He looks like a strong magus. Is he a physique-tempering magus? As if dissatisfied with his companion's performance, the other male magus could not help but frown. What's so good about a physique-tempering magus? He soaks himself in all sorts of strange liquids all day long, and his body always smells weird. F***ck, they really are a pair of inexperienced newbies. They actually dare to publicly comment on a magus that they don't know anything about. They really don't know how to write the word death. The old magus quickly interrupted their nonsense and continued to enthusiastically explain the previous mission to them. The ruins are at the edge of the dark forest. Although it has been searched a few times, there are still some things left inside. As long as you listen to me, I guarantee that you will be able to obtain some good resources from there. The old magus continued to ramble on, but by this time, Grimm had already entered the cabin and was affected by the omnipresent spell formation, so the rest of the content could not be heard. Grimm only listened to these insignificant people and did not pay much attention to them. The old magus looked like a piece of trash, who had no hope of advancing and had barely reached his current level through the torment of years. From the gleam of his eyes, Grimm could feel a faint malicious intent that was well hidden. It seemed that the two young magi had become his prey. If they were tricked into the so-called ruins, they would either fall into a trap or fall into a trap. One could only imagine what would happen to them. But what did that have to do with Grimm? As the higher-ups of the Wizard's Pagoda in Rain City had already informed them beforehand, the magus in charge of the flying ship had undoubtedly given Grimm the largest and most luxurious room on the ship. The interior of the flying ship was not very spacious. Other than the cargo hold on the bottom floor, the rest of the rooms were very small. Even the official sorcerers lived in small and narrow cabins. But when Grimm followed the magus in charge to his room, he felt refreshed. The room in front of him was not only spacious and bright, but it was also clearly divided into two floors. The outer floor was naturally a guest room and a study, while the inner floor was a bedroom and a separate workshop. There was even a small alchemy table in the room. That way, since Grimm was on the move, he could also take care of some of the alchemy items that he carried with him. At this point, ordinary level 1 and 2 magic puppets could not help him at all. But level 3 elemental essence crystals were not that easy to obtain, so Grimm could only try his best to create some low-level magic puppets to strengthen the personal combat power of the magi in the family. With the family's private resource points starting to operate, coupled with the large amount of giant dragon resources in the Lance dimension, the Crimson family had a stable resource collection system. Under these circumstances, the convenient and practical elemental magic puppets were no longer sold as a strategic resource, but instead became an internal benefit for the Crimson Magi. Therefore, during this lonely journey, reading books, looking at the scenery along the way, and taking the time to create some unique elemental magic puppets, this became a daily routine for Grimm. For the current Grimm, meditation had almost no effect on increasing his mental strength. However, after hundreds of years of practice, 4 hours of meditation a day had become an unshakable basic daily routine. Even though the increase was small, if he persisted for a long time, he would still be able to accumulate some result. If he wanted to become a truly powerful magus, he would not be able to do so without toiling day after day. Even during this seemingly leisurely journey, the AI chip in Grimm's mind was still operating at high speeds, analyzing the progress of each mission in an orderly manner. After reaching level 3, Grimm's spiritual force had increased, and so had the AI chip's ability to calculate and process data. Grimm found that even without the help of the AI chip, his brain could now process large amounts of data at high speed. Roughly estimating, he was now comparable to the AI chip when it was at level 1. This also explained how high-ranked magi dealt with complicated three-dimensional spell formations that were divided into different levels. With the help of powerful spiritual force, the brain of every high-ranked magus was developed to the fullest. In terms of functions, they were not any weaker than an AI from his previous world. Some magi even used strange spells to stimulate the abnormal growth of their brains, then cut them out and store them in their personal wizard's pagoda. This way, with the strange connection between the brain and the cloned brain, these magi could obtain extraordinary memory and an almost limitless memory storage space. From this point of view, it was like they had a primitive AI chip that was constantly assisting them. If Grimm were to encounter such a fellow, the advantage of the AI chip would be wiped out in an instant. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.